I'll put it on you, boy.
The British title in boxing is well over a century old. The title belt is known as the Lonsdale belt, and due to how historical it is, winning the strap is a very prestigious honour. The Lonsdale belt's roots trace back further than the roots of any of the 4 major world titles which exist in boxing today, even including the WBA, who were founded as the NBA in 1921. And the Lonsdale belt also traces back further than the Ring magazine belt and all, making the Lonsdale belt the oldest belt in boxing. On average, across the entire history of Queensberry rules boxing, the heavyweight division has been the most popular division, and in the long and rich history of the British title, there has been quite the mix of British heavyweight champions. From eras where British heavyweights had no success at world level at all, to eras where Brits pretty much ruled the heavyweight division. But in eras where Brits did have a level of success at world level, the British heavyweight title would still be passed around by some British level guys who never got a sniff at world level, and each era of the British heavyweight title scene has had its own unique charm to it. In today's video, we will be looking back at every British heavyweight champion ever, from the start of the title's existence, up until this present day. But before we look at the entire lineage of this precious championship, let's take a brief look at the history of the title. So the recognition of a boxing champion of Great Britain actually began before the Lonsdale belt was introduced, but only a few years before. British boxing used to be governed by the National Sporting Club. They were the ones who recognised the first heavyweight champion of Great Britain, which was also the first boxing champion of Britain across any weight class in fact, in 1905. Jack Palmer defeated Jeff Thorne in December 1905 to become the inaugural British heavyweight champion. It was in 1909 when the president of the National Sporting Club, Hugh Loeffler, the 5th Earl of Lonsdale, introduced the Lonsdale Challenge belt. Freddie Welch became the first Lonsdale belt holder in 1909, but that was at lightweight. The Lonsdale belt wouldn't be awarded to a heavyweight until 1911 when Bombardier Billy Wells won the British heavyweight title from William Iron Hague. So Billy Wells is the first ever heavyweight to hold that precious Lonsdale belt that has gone on to be held by many great fighters. This here is the original design of the Lonsdale belt, which would have been mainly known as the Lonsdale Challenge belt back then. In 1929, the National Sporting Club lost control of British boxing, and the British Boxing Board of Control became the new governors of boxing in Britain. That's the same British Boxing Board of Control who are in charge of British boxing to this day. The British Boxing Board of Control began to govern the British title in 1936. The BBBofC continued on the legacy of the Lonsdale belt, as the National Sporting Club president Hugh Loeffler consented to the British Boxing Board of Control using the Lonsdale name for the belt, and Loeffler consented to a picture of himself being on the belt. And we still see that picture of the 5th Earl of Lonsdale, Hugh Loeffler, on the British title belt today. The first heavyweight to hold the British Boxing Board of Control governed Lonsdale belt was the Welshman Tommy Farr in 1937, but because the British Boxing Board of Control kept the title as the Lonsdale belt, the same version of the championship that was recognised by the National Sporting Club, the lineage of the British heavyweight title still traced back to Jack Palmer, and the lineage of the physical belt itself traced back to Bombardier Billy Wells. So despite the governors of British boxing changing at a point in time, the British title still follows a clear lineage, with each weight class only having one champion at a time. So now let's take a look at all of the fighters who held the British heavyweight title in chronological order, from the early 1900s all the way through the whole of the 20th century, through the 2000s, through the 2010s, and all the way to the 2020s. So as aforementioned, the first heavyweight champion of Great Britain was Jack Palmer. He defeated Jeff Thorne by a 4th round knockout to become the inaugural champ in December of 1905. Now you'll have to bear with the early days of this title's lineage, as footage is very limited here. Boxing wasn't televised until the 1930s, and there was footage of fights before then, but it was sporadic. And in the early days of televised boxing, there was still a bunch of fights that weren't even filmed. But don't you worry, there'll be plenty of footage to enjoy later in the video. So the inaugural British heavyweight champion Jack Palmer did go on to become a world title challenger, as he went on to challenge the Canadian Tommy Burns for the world heavyweight title in 1908 in a losing effort when he was knocked out by Burns in the 4th round. Palmer was the 8th of Burns' 13 world heavyweight title defences, and Burns came to England to defend against Palmer as Burns was on a world tour. Now, the man who Palmer beat for the inaugural British heavyweight title, Jeff Thorne, who there's not even a picture of out there, had fought boxing legends, but of course came up short each time. In 1899, Jeff Thorne served as Bob Fitzsimmons' first opponent, since Fitzsimmons lost the world heavyweight title to James J. Jeffries. Fitzsimmons knocked Fawn out in a round. And in his first fight after being knocked out by Jack Palmer in the inaugural British heavyweight title fight, Fawn was knocked out by pound for pound legend Sam Langford in one round. Now, the inaugural champion Jack Palmer made no successful defences of the British heavyweight title, as in his first fight since winning the belt in October of 1906, Palmer lost his title to Gunnar Moir by way of a 9th round disqualification, which was ruled due to repeated low blows landed by Palmer. Gunnar Moir made one successful defence of his British title when he knocked out Tiger Smith in the first round in February 1907. Then, as the sitting heavyweight champion of Great Britain, Gunnar Moir also challenged for Tommy Burns' world heavyweight title in December of 1907. So Gunnar Moir challenged Burns for the world title before Jack Palmer did, the man he won the British title off of. And Burns also came to England to defend his belt against Gunnar Moir, which was then the first ever world heavyweight title fight outside of the USA. Gunnar Moir fell short in his world title opportunity when Burns knocked him out in the 10th round, but Moir of course kept hold of his British title after losing the world title fight. However, in his next fight after the loss to Tommy Burns, in April of 1909, Gunnar Moir lost his belt to William Iron Hague by way of a first round knockout. So Iron Hague was the third heavyweight champion of Great Britain, and he is the last pre-Lonsdale belt era British heavyweight champ. Later in 1909, in his first fight since winning the British title, Iron Hague lost to the legendary Sam Langford. Sam Langford, who came to England and stepped into this heavyweight affair against Hague, weighing a mere 158 pounds, and he knocked Iron Hague out in the 4th round. But in his losing effort, Iron Hague knocked Sam Langford down in the 2nd round. And Langford went on to say that the left hook that Iron Hague knocked him down with in round 2 was the hardest that he'd ever been hit, and Hague actually broke his left hand landing that punch on Langford. Iron Hague remained the British champ after that loss to Langford, as Langford was not British. Hague competed in 8 non-title affairs until losing his British title to Billy Wells in his first official title defence in April of 1911. William Iron Hague vs Bombardier Billy Wells was the first ever heavyweight fight for the Lonsdale belt, so as mentioned earlier, Billy Wells was the first heavyweight to hold that precious strap. Now, in his near 8-year reign as British heavyweight champ, Bombardier Billy Wells made 13 defences of the title. Billy Wells actually had 34 fights during his British title reign, going 24-5 with 5 no contests, and 13 of those 24 wins were recorded as British heavyweight title defences. This of course smashed the record for the most British heavyweight title defences at the time, and spoiler alert, the 4th ever British heavyweight champion Billy Wells remains the record holder for the most British heavyweight title defences to this day. Billy Wells almost had major involvement on the world scene in his first fight after winning the British title from Iron Hague, as he was set to challenge Jack Johnson for the world heavyweight title in London in October of 1911. But this fight was opposed by the public and the press due to political reasons, including racial segregation or the colour bar, so the Home Secretary Winston Churchill was forced to cancel the bout. Well, it was the proposal of the Billy Wells vs Jack Johnson fight and the subsequent public outrage to the proposal of that fight that really made the colour bar a thing in British boxing. After the 13 successful defences of the British heavyweight title, Billy Wells lost his belt to Joe Beckett in February 1919 when Beckett knocked him out in the 5th round. So Joe Beckett became the 5th ever heavyweight champion of Great Britain and the 2nd heavyweight to hold the Lonsdale belt. Now the thing is, although Joe Beckett did dethrone the long-reigning British heavyweight champion Billy Wells, the title became vacant after Beckett beat Wells, as the National Sporting Club did not recognise Beckett as the champion. According to some reports, this is due to the fact that Billy Wells vs Joe Beckett was not actually sanctioned by the National Sporting Club. 3 months after Beckett dethroned Billy Wells, in May of 1919, Frank Goddard won the vacant British heavyweight title with a stoppage victory over Jack Currie. But less than a month after that, Joe Beckett challenged Frank Goddard for Goddard's newly won British heavyweight title. Joe Beckett knocked Frank Goddard out in the 2nd round to regain/officially win that British heavyweight title that he never won before. So it's not clear whether or not Joe Beckett did indeed become the 5th British heavyweight champion with his win over Billy Wells, or if Frank Goddard became the 5th champion when he became the first man to win a vacant British heavyweight title. But either way, Joe Beckett did officially become the British heavyweight champion with his win over Frank Goddard in June of 1919. So let's now move on through the rest of the British heavyweight champions in the 20th century. In Joe Beckett's first official reign as British heavyweight champion, he made 4 title defences until he relinquished the belt when he retired in 1923. In November of 1923, none other than Frank Goddard, the then most recent and first ever man to pick up a vacant British heavyweight title, fought the British light heavyweight champion Jack Bloomfield in a vacant British heavyweight title fight. In the second round of that fight, Bloomfield dropped Goddard, and Bloomfield then hit Goddard when he was still down, so Bloomfield was therefore disqualified. So Frank Goddard was the winner by disqualification, and he had become a 2-time British heavyweight champion. Frank Goddard is the first man to hold the title twice, to those who do not recognise Joe Beckett's first reign. Goddard made his only official defence of his British title across his 2 reigns in 1924, and he lost the title to Phil Scott by a 3rd round knockout in his last ever fight in March of 1926. So Phil Scott was the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. Phil Scott made 1 title defence as British heavyweight champion in April of 1926. He never lost the title in the ring, and he fought on until he retired in 1931 without defending the belt again since that one defence in April of 1926. The vacant title wasn't contested for until November of 1931, so there was no British heavyweight title fight for over 5.5 years. This was the second longest period that the title wasn't contested for throughout its history to that point, and it was only 3 months shorter than the longest ever period that the title wasn't contested for, which was when World War II happened, which was after this point of course. In November of 1931, Reggie Meen defeated Charlie Smith on points over 15 rounds to become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. After winning the British title, Reggie Meen suffered a knockout loss to Hein Muller in challenging for Muller's European heavyweight title. British heavyweight champions falling short in European title fights was quite a common theme back then. In his first attempt to defend the British title, in July of 1932, Reggie Meen lost the title to the Welshman Jack Petersen by a 2nd round knockout. So Jack Petersen was the new holder of the precious Lonsdale belt. Jack Petersen of Wales was the first British heavyweight champion who was not from England. Petersen had won the British light heavyweight title the fight before he defeated Meen for the heavyweight strap, so the victory over Meen also made Jack Petersen the first ever 2-weight British champion. Jack Petersen made 2 successful defences of his British heavyweight title, until the former middleweight and light heavyweight champion of Great Britain Len Harvey dethroned Petersen of the heavyweight title via a 15-round points victory at the Royal Albert Hall in November of 1933. So in beating the first ever 2-weight British champion Jack Petersen to become the new British heavyweight champion, Len Harvey became the first ever 3-weight British champion, and Len Harvey remains the only ever 3-weight British champion to this day. Len Harvey defeated Petersen for the British heavyweight title not long after winning the light heavyweight title that Petersen himself left vacant. Len Harvey made no official defence of the British heavyweight title, but he won the Commonwealth heavyweight title from the acclaimed Larry Gaines as the sitting British heavyweight champion with a points victory. Harvey's first attempted British heavyweight title defence was against Jack Petersen in a rematch in June of 1934. And Petersen stopped Harvey in the 12th round to regain the British heavyweight title and to win the Commonwealth title. By the way, the Commonwealth title was referred to as the British Empire title back then, and it would continue to be called the British Empire title for decades to come from that point. And fights for the British and Commonwealth titles were referred to as British and Empire title fights, but we'll stick to the familiar contemporary name of the Commonwealth title here. In Jack Petersen's 2nd reign as British heavyweight champion, he made 3 defences of the title. The second defence of the 3 being a points win over Len Harvey in a rubber match, the 3rd instalment of their trilogy. So Petersen amassed a total of 5 British heavyweight title defences across his 2 reigns. Now, it was the South African Ben Foord who would end Petersen's 2nd reign as British heavyweight champ in August of 1936. Ben Foord knocked Petersen out in the 3rd round to become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. And in victory, Foord had avenged his loss to Petersen in a non-title bout that happened over 2 years prior. In March of 1937, before Ben Foord could make a successful defence of his British title, the Welshman Tommy Farr dethroned Foord with a 15-round points victory to become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. Despite the British Boxing Board of Control being founded in 1929 and having full control of British boxing by 1931, Tommy Farr, who became champion in 1937, is listed as the first holder of the British Boxing Board of Control version of the Lonsdale belt at heavyweight. Tommy Farr also made no defences of his British heavyweight title. Precisely a month after beating Ben Foord for the title, Tommy Farr defeated former heavyweight champion of the world Max Baer by a 12-round points decision. In June of 1937, Farr then took on Walter Neusel in another non-title bout, and he knocked Neusel out in the third round. And then Tommy Farr vacated his British heavyweight title in order to challenge for Joe Louis's world heavyweight title at the Yankee Stadium in New York in August of 1937. Tommy Farr put on a gallant effort in his world heavyweight title shot against Joe Louis, and he made it the 15-round distance with Louis. Tommy Farr used his experience advantage to become the first fighter to take Joe Louis the 15-round distance. A lot of fans at the time, especially in Britain, thought that Tommy Farr did enough for the win in this world heavyweight title fight. But Joe Louis did bloody up Farr's face badly with a persistent jab that he connected with throughout the fight, and Farr did go on to admit that the right man won. So Tommy Farr lost a 15-round unanimous decision to Joe Louis, and he served as the first of Joe Louis's famous 25 consecutive world heavyweight title defences, going on to be one of the only 3 challengers to make it the distance with Joe Louis. Oh, and this fight between Tommy Farr and Joe Louis was also named the 1937 Fight of the Year by Ring magazine. But back on topic to the Lonsdale belts now, the British heavyweight title would next be contested for in December of 1938 when former British heavyweight champ and then current and 2-time British light heavyweight champ Len Harvey battled Eddie Phillips in a vacant title fight. Eddie Phillips was disqualified for repeated low blows in the 4th round of that fight, so Len Harvey was the winner and had become a 2-time heavyweight champion of Great Britain, joining the club of Frank Goddard of the fighters that had become a 2-time British heavyweight champ by way of a disqualification victory in a vacant title fight. Pretty obscure trivia there. Len Harvey made no defences of the British heavyweight title, much like in his first reign with the title. He vacated the title and he went on to have another Commonwealth heavyweight title fight with Larry Gaines, and to then make another defence of his British light heavyweight title in a rematch with Jock McAvoy, who he won that title from in 1939. Those 2 title fight rematches were both successful efforts from Len Harvey. In September of 1939 now, World War II began, which caused the British heavyweight title to remain inactive until September of 1944. To touch on a British light heavyweight title fight that is pretty relevant to the British heavyweight title scene here that took place in the middle of World War II's duration, in June of 1942, a while after the Blitz was over, the then current British light heavyweight champion and the most recent British heavyweight title holder Len Harvey, who was a pilot officer in the Royal Air Force at the time, put his light heavyweight British title on the line against RAF Sergeant and acclaimed British level fighter Freddie Mills at White Hart Lane. In the second round of that fight, Freddie Mills would knock Len Harvey clean out of the ring to become the new light heavyweight champion of Great Britain. Freddie Mills made no defences of the British light heavyweight title, and the British heavyweight title remained vacant until light heavyweight champ Freddie Mills took on the battle-hardened Jack London in a vacant British heavyweight title fight in September of 1944. While World War II was still ongoing, of course. The natural heavyweight Jack London outweighed the light heavyweight Freddie Mills by over 3 stone, but Mills had defeated Jack London already back in 1941 by a 10-run points decision, and he was the favourite going into this rematch and vacant title fight. Freddie Mills and Jack London engaged in a tough back and forth battle over the 15-round distance. After the 15 rounds had concluded, Jack London's hand was raised as the victor. He had pulled off the upset with the points win, so Jack London was the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. Oh, and by the way, the vacant Commonwealth heavyweight title was on the line here too, so Jack London also became the new Commonwealth champ and all. Jack London first put his titles on the line in July of 1945 against Bruce Woodcock. The challenger Bruce Woodcock would score a knockout in the 6th round over Jack London to become the new British and Commonwealth heavyweight champion. The Lonsdale belt saw no action in the heavyweight division for a good while from that point, as it was 4 years into Woodcock's reign when he would make his first British title defence. Before his first British title defence, Woodcock had won the European title, defended the European title, got stopped in a fight billed as a world title eliminator, retained the Commonwealth title alone, until he finally had a fight sanctioned for the Lonsdale belt in June of 1945 against former British light heavyweight champ and British heavyweight title challenger Freddie Mills. This was a rematch as Bruce Woodcock defeated Freddie Mills in a non-title bout earlier in his title reign, in 1946. This time, Woodcock would be victorious over Mills again as he knocked him out in round 14 to remain the British, European and Commonwealth heavyweight champion. That was officially British title defence number 1 for Woodcock. Now Woodcock's next fight after this British title defence was a bit of a weird one to say the least. So in September of 1949, Woodcock was meant to rematch Lee Sovold, a man who he gained a disqualification victory over in December of 1948. What was to be on the line in this fight between Woodcock and Savold was not Woodcock's British Boxing Board of Control governed British heavyweight title, which he of course still held, but a version of the world heavyweight title that the British Boxing Board of Control decided to create. In March of that year, 1949 that is, the heavyweight champion of the world Joe Louis announced his retirement from boxing, thus relinquishing the main version of the world heavyweight title, the NBA title. On June 22nd of 1949, just 3 weeks after Bruce Woodcock's British title defence against Freddie Mills, Ezzard Charles defeated Jersey Joe Walcott in a vacant NBA World Heavyweight title fight. So Ezzard Charles then had his claim to the World Heavyweight title. But the thing is, the British Boxing Board of Control decided that they weren't going to recognise Ezzard Charles as the heavyweight champion of the world upon his vacant title fight victory and the lineal champion Joe Louis's retirement. The British Boxing Board of Control were going to recognise their own heavyweight champion of the world. With the fight for the inaugural title set to take place in September of 1949 between the British heavyweight champ Bruce Woodcock and the American Lee Savold. Unfortunately, Woodcock suffered head and shoulder injuries when he crashed his lorry in August of 49, so this inaugural British Boxing Board of Control sanctioned world heavyweight title fight between Woodcock and Savold did not end up happening until June of 1950. This spelled a year of inactivity for Woodcock since his successful British title defence against Freddie Mills, and a year and a half of inactivity for Lee Savold, who had not fought since his disqualification loss to Woodcock himself in 1948. So this June 1950 fight was an immediate rematch on Savold's part. In this rematch and vacant world title fight, Lee Savold gained a stoppage victory over Woodcock when Woodcock retired after the 4th round due to a badly cut left eyebrow. So Lee Savold was the new heavyweight champion of the world as per the British Boxing Board of Control's recognition, but the actual British heavyweight champion was still Bruce Woodcock and the actual world heavyweight champ was Ezzard Charles. Despite Ezzard Charles' claim to the world title being vastly more legitimate than Savold's claim to the title anyway, just 3.5 months after Savold's victory over Woodcock, Ezzard Charles would defeat the returning lineal champion Joe Louis to become the world heavyweight champion by any form of recognition. Ezzard Charles was the heavyweight champion of the world, and that was that. Just to stick to the chronological order of events before we get to the end of this weird British world heavyweight title story, in November of 1950, Bruce Woodcock attempted to make his second British heavyweight title defence against Jack Gardner. In that fight, Jack Gardner would win by stoppage as Woodcock pulled out of the fight after the 11th round due to cuts and damage to the left eye again. So Jack Gardner was the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain and the Commonwealth champ too. Woodcock announced his retirement from the sport the day after the loss to Gardner due to the damage that had been done to his left eye in his last 2 fights. Back to Lee Savold now. In his first fight since winning the British board version of the world title in June of 1951, so a year on from that win over Woodcock, he fought a Joe Louis who was on the comeback trail following his world title loss to Ezzard Charles 9 months prior. Joe Louis stopped the British Boxing Board of Control world heavyweight champion Lee Savold in the 6th round, and that strange version of the world title that never really got established then became obsolete. So back to the legitimate heavyweight title that the British Boxing Board of Control sanctioned, the British heavyweight title, the title that this video is about. The new champion Jack Gardner did not successfully defend his Lonsdale belt once. He won and lost the European title while he held the British title, and he then lost the British and Commonwealth titles to Welshman Johnny Williams by a 15-round points decision in March of 1952. So there was a new British and Commonwealth heavyweight champion in the form of Johnny Williams. Just to note, Johnny Williams' 1952 British title fight victory over Jack Gardner was a rematch, as Gardner beat Williams by a 12-round points decision back in 1950. Williams made no successful British title defences. He made a successful defence of the Commonwealth title alone against a South African heavyweight while he was champion of Britain. Johnny Williams first put that British title on the line in May of 1953 against Dunn, a former light heavyweight champion of Great Britain who was coming off of a big heavyweight win over Tommy Farr. This was a trilogy bout between Williams and Cockell, as the pair fought each other twice in 1948, with Dunn Cockell winning an 8-round decision in the first fight, and Johnny Williams stopping Cockell in the 2nd round in the second fight. And in this 1953 rubber match for the British heavyweight title, Dunn Cockell would outpoint Johnny Williams over the 15 rounds to become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain and the Commonwealth, and a 2-weight champion of Great Britain. Dunn Cockell kept hold of the British heavyweight title for a while, but never defended it. He defended the Commonwealth title in January of 1954, then went on to pursue world honours, eventually challenging for Rocky Marciano's world heavyweight title in May of 1955. Cockell fell short in his world title challenging effort as he was stopped by Marciano in the 9th round, in what ended up being Rocky Marciano's penultimate career bout. Later in 1955, a pair of British heavyweight title eliminators took place that eventually set up a vacant British heavyweight title fight in 1956. In June of 55, former champions Johnny Williams and Jack Gardner faced off in a trilogy bout scheduled for 12 rounds, billed as an eliminator for Don Cockell's British heavyweight title. Cockell was still considered British champion, despite having not made a title defence in his reign of over 2 years. In this rubber match, Jack Gardner would stop Williams in the 5th round to go 2-1 over Williams and become next in line for the British heavyweight title. In November of 55, a Welshman by the name of Joe Erskine fought in a scheduled 10-round British heavyweight title eliminator against an Englishman by the name of Henry Cooper. Erskine bested Cooper in this fight when he won a 10-round points decision to put himself in line for a British title fight. On April 24th of 1956, Jack Gardner, the winner of the first of the two 1955 title eliminators, and the champion Don Cockell would both be fighting on the same card in Earl's Court, and Jack Gardner and Don Cockell would both lose by a second-round knockout in their respective fights that night, and they would both never box again. Don Cockell had given up his British and Commonwealth heavyweight titles and officially retired in May of 1956. So this takes us to August 27th of 1956. With Don Cockell and Jack Gardner both retired, the winner of one of the 1955 eliminators, Joe Erskine, would duke it out with the loser of the other eliminator and former champion Johnny Williams in an all-Welsh affair for the vacant British heavyweight title, in Cardiff. Johnny Williams would not succeed in his pursuit of becoming a 2-time heavyweight champion of Great Britain, as Joe Erskine would outpoint his compatriot to win a 15-round decision and become the new champion. On the undercard of the vacant title fight between Erskine and Williams, a kid called Brian London scored a second-round knockout over Trevor Snell in a scheduled 8-rounder. If you recognise that last name London from the British heavyweight champion of the 1940s, Jack London, well yes, Brian London is indeed the son of Jack London. So let's see if Brian will be able to achieve what his father did and become a heavyweight champion of Britain one day. Well, earlier that year, in May of 56, this Brian London kid got stopped in the first round by Henry Cooper. And the new British champion Joe Erskine got a win over Henry Cooper in that title eliminator in 55, so surely Brian London would never be a match for Joe Erskine. So after Don Cockell gave up the British and Commonwealth titles when he retired in 1956, a Jamaican fellow called Joey Bygraves got hold of that Commonwealth title in a vacant title fight in June of that year. Well, Bygraves lived in England since he was a teen, and he trained, turned pro, and mainly fought in England, but he wasn't applicable to fight for the British title, as he wasn't born in Britain. Now, we are talking about the British title here, so we needn't go into too much detail about the Commonwealth title, but the British heavyweight title being reunified with the Commonwealth title is somewhat relevant here. Unfortunately, the situation with the Commonwealth title here is a bit messy based on some conflicting records. So Joey Bygraves was more than a match for British level guys. He knocked out former British heavyweight champ Jack Gardner in 2 rounds to earn the vacant Commonwealth title shot. He stopped former British champ Johnny Williams in a non-title fight while he was champ, and he defended his Commonwealth title with a stoppage victory over Henry Cooper in February of 1957, avenging his 8-round points loss to Cooper from back in 55. After defending his Empire title by fighting to a draw with Dick Richardson in May, and after losing in a non-title fight in June, the best I can offer is that for some odd reason, in late August, Bygraves was stripped of the Commonwealth heavyweight title. Then come September 17th, Joe Erskine would be making his first British title defence in a rematch against Henry Cooper, with presumably the vacant Commonwealth heavyweight title on the line too, although the Commonwealth title on the line here in this rematch against Erskine and Cooper is not listed to be vacant. But it of course would have had to have been vacant because Joey Bygraves was the most recent Commonwealth heavyweight champ going into this fight between Erskine and Cooper, and Bygraves had not lost a title in the ring. Now, Joe Erskine would outpoint Henry Cooper to go 2-0 over Henry Cooper, remain the British heavyweight champ, and become the new Commonwealth heavyweight champ. 2 months later, on November 25th, Erskine would make his first successful defence of the Commonwealth title with a 15-round points win over the very recently turned former Commonwealth champ, Joe Bygraves. Bygraves, who had fought as recently as September 18th in a rematch against Kittian Lave, the man who he previously won the vacant Commonwealth title against. So the reunification of the British and Commonwealth heavyweight titles in 1957 is a strange case. I wonder why Bygraves was stripped of the title when he was still very active. Is it so that Erskine vs Cooper 2 could be for the Commonwealth title as well as the British title, and then they just gave Bygraves a shot to get the Commonwealth title back after Erskine vs Cooper 2? So right after the British title defence and vacant Commonwealth title winning fight against Henry Cooper, and then the Commonwealth title defence against Joe Bygraves, Joe Erskine challenged for Ingemar Johansson's European title in Sweden, and Erskine lost by way of stoppage in that fight when he didn't answer the bell after the 14th round. After his failed European title effort, Joe Erskine was back to Great Britain, defending his British and Commonwealth titles against Brian London at the White City Stadium on the 3rd of June 1958. Boxing math would point towards a Joe Erskine win here. As aforementioned, Joe Erskine had defeated the same Henry Cooper, who held a first round stoppage win over Brian London. Well, by the point that London was challenging Erskine, Erskine had yet another win over Henry Cooper. But now, when Brian London squared off with Joe Erskine, London would knock Erskine out in the 8th round to become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. Brian London had achieved the same great feat as his father Jack London in becoming British heavyweight champ, and Brian became British and Commonwealth champ within just 14 years of his father winning those honours. Brian and Jack London are the only ever father and son duo to both win the British heavyweight title. They were the first ever father and son pairing to both win a Lonsdale belt in any weight class in fact, and only one other father and son pairing have done it since up until now, that being Wally Swift Sr. and Wally Swift Jr. Now, much like his father Jack, Brian London would never successfully defend his British title. Brian London avenged his loss to Willie Pastrano in a non-title bout, then he put his British and Commonwealth heavyweight titles on the line against Henry Cooper at the Earl's Court on the 12th of January 1959. This was of course the same Henry Cooper who stopped Brian London in the first round back in 1956. Now, when this rematch scheduled for 15 rounds for the British and Empire titles, Brian London did manage to bloody up the face of Cooper, the cut over the left eye that Cooper would always suffer from opened up, and Cooper's nose was bleeding from the first round. But Cooper would land the better shots over the 15 rounds, being active with the jab and throwing some nice power shots to bruise up the face of Brian London as well. And after a tough 15 rounds, it was declared that Henry Cooper had done enough for the win and his hand was raised in victory. Henry Cooper was the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain and the British Empire, or the Commonwealth. Now, before we get to the legendary, and spoiler alert, lengthy British heavyweight title reign of Henry Cooper, I shall note that in Brian London's first fight since losing his British title to Henry Cooper, in May of 1959, he would be over to America to challenge for Floyd Patterson's world heavyweight title. So unlike his father Jack, Brian London would go on to compete at world level. Now, this was a mismatch, of course, a world champion defending his belt against a guy who had just lost his British title. This was seen as a warm-up fight for Floyd Patterson, a warm-up for his fight against Ingemar Johansson, which was to take place the next month. And the British Boxing Board of Control actually fined Brian London £1,000 for even going over to the States to represent Great Britain in this fight, because they felt that he had no chance to win at all. He wasn't a rightful world title challenger, as he wasn't even the British champ. Patterson would relentlessly piece up Brian London with combinations in that title fight, whipping in a lot of big shots to the body of Brian London, and Patterson would stop London in round 11 after handing him quite the beating. This fight with Patterson wouldn't be Brian London's only world title shot in his career, as fast forward to 1966, Brian London was given a shot at Muhammad Ali's world heavyweight title. Ali made light work of London and stopped him in 3. And with that being said, before we move on to Henry Cooper's reign, let's count up the total combined record of every British heavyweight champion from the first champion Jack Palmer in 1905 all the way up until Brian London in 1959 in world heavyweight title fights and European heavyweight title fights. So it's no secret that British heavyweights did not see much success at world level for the most part of the 20th century. The American press would ridicule British heavyweights by calling them horizontal heavyweights, implying that they were short and fat pretty much. And the British heavyweights were just seen as losers on the world stage who didn't have the resilience or the finesse that the American heavyweights possessed. Now, it's fair to call British heavyweights losers on the world stage up to this point in the 20th century and for a good while beyond 1958, as the last heavyweight world champion and only world heavyweight champion from Great Britain to that point was Bob Fitzsimmons, who was champion in the 19th century. Fitzsimmons won the heavyweight championship of the world from James J. Corbett in 1897 and lost it to James J. Jeffries in 1899. And of course, the first heavyweight champion of Great Britain was crowned in 1905 in the form of Jack Palmer. And the former world champion Fitzsimmons never contested for the British title, so no British heavyweight champion to this point had been a world heavyweight champion. So all the British heavyweight champions from Jack Palmer up until Brian London will have a combined record of 0 and something in world heavyweight title fights. And for the sake of it, we'll also tally up how British heavyweight champs of this time period did at European level, i.e. their record in challenging for the EBU heavyweight title, the European Boxing Union heavyweight title that is. So to look at the world title record first. The first two fighters to ever hold the British heavyweight title in Jack Palmer and Gardner Moir both challenged for Tommy Burns' heavyweight title, and they were both knocked out. Now the lack of world title shots for British heavyweights is also an indictment of the all-round lack of success of British heavyweight boxing back then. And the next British heavyweight champion to have a world title shot was the 15th British heavyweight champion Tommy Farr, who won the British title in 1937 and challenged Joe Louis for his world title that same year and lost, of course. So no British heavyweight champion got a world heavyweight title shot for 29 years, from 1908 to 1937. Boy were those the dark ages, eh? Now it would be another 18 years after Tommy Farr fought Joe Louis that a British heavyweight champ fought for a world heavyweight title, which is when Don Cockell took on Rocky Marciano for the title, and Cockell was stopped by Marciano. Then after Don Cockell, it was Brian London who went on to have 2 world heavyweight title shots after being British champ, when he took on Floyd Patterson and got knocked out, and when he took on Ali and got knocked out. So there were 19 different holders of the British heavyweight title in the first 53 years of its existence, and those 19 British heavyweight champions challenged for the world heavyweight title a total of 6 times, going 0-6, with 5 of the 6 losses being by knockout. Now 3 of the British heavyweight champions in this time period in Phil Scott, Bruce Woodcock and Jack Gardner did become European heavyweight champ, so that is a good level of success for the Brits. But to quantify the all-round level of success at European level for British heavyweight champions during this time, I have tallied up their total combined record in European heavyweight title fights, excluding all British affairs. So in the 11 British versus non-British European heavyweight title fights for British heavyweight champions from 1905 to 1958, the combined record for Brits is 4 wins to 7 losses, which is not terrible for one little island against the whole continent, to be fair. So that's just a little roundup of how British heavyweight champions fared above British level prior to the 1960s. Now let's take a good old look at R. Henry's British and Empire title reign. It was after gaining a stoppage victory over former heavyweight champion of Europe Dick Richardson in Richardson's native Wales, and climbing off of the canvas to win a 10-round points decision over the highly ranked American contender Zora Foley, that Henry Cooper challenged for Brian London's British and Commonwealth heavyweight titles on January 12, 1959. And with a hard-fought 15-round points victory over Brian London, Cooper was crowned the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. This title fight victory over London improved Cooper's record to 18-7-1. In Cooper's next fight, in August of 1959, he did not defend the British title, only the Commonwealth title, then known as the British Empire title. He stopped the South African Gowie de Klerk in the 5th round to remain the Commonwealth champ. On November 17th of 1959, Henry Cooper would be making his first British title defence in a trilogy fight with the former British heavyweight champion from Wales, Joe Erskine. Erskine, who had twice defeated Henry Cooper, first by a 10-round points decision in 1955, and then he beat Cooper by a 15-round points decision in the defence of what was then his British heavyweight title in 1957. In this trilogy bout, Henry Cooper would put on a relentless display of power punching, especially with that patented left hook of his, and in the 12th round, Cooper would knock Erskine down 3 times by way of that devastating left hook. The last knockdown coming by way of a combination that had Erskine hanging over the ropes and out for the count. Cooper's left hook was known as Henry's hammer, and those were for sure some hammering left hooks that he unloaded on poor Erskine there. With that 12th round knockout victory, Henry Cooper remained the holder of that precious Lonsdale belt, and he had avenged his 2 points losses to Joe Erskine with an emphatic knockout victory. But Erskine was still 2 wins to 1 over Cooper. If it's worth anything, before that brutal 12th round knockout, Cooper did clock Erskine with an illegal left hook as Erskine was getting back up from the canvas. The referee just allowed that one, and Cooper also hit Erskine with a hard left hook right on the bell at the end of the 5th round.
That's a good right hand from Cooper and a left hook, and that's landed just on the bell, and Erskine staggers backwards.
After that British title defence, Cooper would pick up a pair of non-title wins. A 10-round points win over American contender Roy Harris in September of 1960, and another 10-round points win over another contender fighting out of America, Alex Mitev, in December of 1960. Cooper survived a hard knockdown in the 10th round to get the win over Mitev. Both of those non-title fight victories took place at the Empire Pool, the old Wembley Arena. On the 21st of March 1961, Cooper would be making his second British heavyweight title defence as he put his British and Empire titles on the line against rival Joe Erskine in a 4th meeting between the two at the Empire Pool. This was their quadrilogy fight, if you will. Cooper would stop Erskine again in fight 4 as a bloodied Erskine would retire in the corner after the 5th round. The two men were now 2-2 against each other. Cooper had levelled the tie. If we were to pick a winner of the quadrilogy, we'd say it's Henry Cooper, as both of his wins were stoppages and he was 2-1 over Erskine in title fights, but they were level on wins against each other in the pros either way. After that second British title defence, in December of 1961, the American Zora Foley would be coming back to England to avenge his loss against Henry Cooper at the Empire Pool. Foley would knock Cooper out in the second round to get revenge for the points defeat over 3 years before that. This served as the first non-title fight lost during Henry Cooper's British and Commonwealth title reign. Cooper then bounced back with 2 more non-title fight victories over Americans that were coming over to England, stopping Tony Hughes in January 1962 and outpointing Wayne Bethea in February. Then on April 2nd, 1962, Cooper would be making his third defence of that Lonsdale belt against the very same man who his first 2 defences were against, Joe Erskine. So yes, this was Henry Cooper versus Joe Erskine 5. Cooper fought with an injured right hand in this affair, but much like Cooper had too, Erskine suffered from bad cuts above his left eye in this fight. Erskine was cut pretty deep here, so the ref stopped the fight after the 9th round. Henry Cooper was the winner by stoppage, and he was still the British and Empire heavyweight champion, and he had won the pentology against Joe Erskine, now being 3 wins to 2 over the Welshman. And he was 3 wins to 1 over him in title fights, as Erskine's win over Cooper back in 1955 was a 10-round non-title affair. Henry Cooper's next fight would be another British title defence, his first British title defence that wasn't against Joe Erskine, but it was another rematch with a Welshman. As on the 26th of March 1963, Cooper would be defending his British and Commonwealth titles against Dick Richardson at the Empire Pool. Cooper suffered bad cuts over both of his eyes in this fight, but at the end of round 5, Cooper dropped Richardson with that left hook, Henry's hammer, to put Richardson on his back for the count. Henry Cooper was the winner by a 5th round KO. He won his first fight against Richardson in 1958 with a 5th round stoppage and all, and this 1963 rematch was Cooper's 4th defence of that Lonsdale belt. Cooper's next fight after British title defence number 4 would be a non-title bout, as a brash undefeated American kid on the cusp of a world title shot called Cassius Clay was having his first fight outside of the US and was coming to England to take on Henry Cooper in a scheduled 10-round affair at Wembley Stadium. The impressive young Clay had a shtick in which he'd predict the fact that he'd knock his opponent out and he'd predict what round he'd do it in, and he would actually match his predictions at a pretty good rate. But going into this fight against Cooper, Clay was coming off of his hard-fought 10-round decision victory over Doug Jones, in which he failed to follow through on his knockout promise. It was such a hard-fought battle that it was named the 1963 Fight of the Year. And now going into the fight with Cooper, Cassius Clay had predicted that he'd stop Cooper in the 5th round. And Clay just saw his fight with Cooper as a warm-up fight for his world title shot against Sonny Liston, and he said that Cooper was a bum not worth training for. So could R. Henry humble the Louisville lip, or would Clay follow through on his 5th round stoppage promise? When the 2 men squared off, Cooper would be bringing the heat to Clay early, much to the delight of the roaring British crowd. Clay was retreating and holding, and Cooper met Clay with some roughhouse tactics that certainly shook Clay up and let him know that he was in for a proper fight against R. Henry. Clay's nose was bloodied and the Wembley crowd were ecstatic. And Henry's hammer was looking like a threatening weapon to the American contender in this opening round here. The second round was very competitive. Cooper was still getting good work in, but this was a better round for Clay, moving around and connecting with jabs, and he managed to open a cut above Cooper's left eye. There goes that weak skin around Cooper's left eye again. Cooper remained dangerous in the 3rd, but Clay had worsened that cut above Cooper's eye badly early in the round. Cassius Clay was gliding around that ring trying to frustrate Cooper as the round went on. Clay was still trying to tame a marauding Cooper in the 4th stanza, but Cooper was getting active with that left hook later in the round, while Clay had his hands down as per usual. And right at the end of the round, Henry Cooper connected with a peach of a pop-up left hook that dropped Cassius Clay hard. The bum who wasn't worth training for left young Clay looking out of his senses. Clay got up and strolled straight back to his corner on wobbly legs with the help of his trainer Angelo Dundee. Dundee used smelling salts to wake Clay up in the corner, which was illegal under British Boxing Board of Control rules, and Dundee brought the referee's attention to a tear in Clay's glove, which bought Clay a bit of extra time to recover between rounds. Now in the 5th round, the round that Clay predicted he'd win the fight in, Clay came out on a frenzy just tagging Cooper with straight punches at will. Cooper was bleeding profusely from the cut above the left eye, and Cooper's gum shield fell out of his mouth as he looked in trouble. Cooper fought on gallantly, but Clay was relentless in there, and Cooper's corner was forced to throw in the towel due to how bad the bleeding from the cut was. Right after getting dropped hard, Clay went on to gain a stoppage victory in the very round he predicted he would do it in, and the heavyweight champion of Great Britain had just suffered his 2nd non-title fight defeat during his British and Commonwealth title reign. In Cassius Clay's next fight after defeating Cooper, he would pull off the upset and defeat Sonny Liston to become the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. So the fact that Henry was able to drop Cassius Clay like that went on to age very well. Despite Clay not being a champion yet when Cooper fought him, the moment was great for Cooper at the time, as Clay was on the cusp of a world title shot. And the British faithful wanted to see the braggadocious Cassius Clay humbled by Henry, of course. People do debate whether or not the idea that Henry Cooper gave Cassius Clay a tough fight all round in that 1963 non-title affair is awfully generous towards Henry Cooper. Some say that Clay was toying around with Cooper and carrying him to that 5th round so he could match his prediction, hence Clay's passive approach at times, and Clay only got floored at the end of the 4th round because he got rather careless, but he still recovered from Henry's hammer instantly anyway. But now, spoiler alert, when Cassius Clay went on to become the full-fledged legend that we know him to be today, becoming a 3-time world heavyweight champion and the whole 9 yards, we were still a long time away from seeing Britain's first world heavyweight champion since Bob Fitzsimmons in the 1890s. So this 4th round knockdown from the plucky underdog Cooper was the UK's little moment in the sun in heavyweight boxing at the time and for years to come. And Cooper did go on to, as many fans put it, dine out on that moment years after his career came to an end. So if you do believe in the notion that Cassius Clay was just carrying Cooper to the 5th round in that fight to get his prediction right, and he only got knocked down because he got too careless, then that mere knockdown on a top contender that was scored in a losing effort being the best moment British boxing had to hold on to in the heavyweight division around that time is an indictment of Britain's all-round lack of success on the world scene in the heavyweight division throughout that era. And if that fact pains you as a British boxing fan, then do stay tuned. There are better days to come in terms of what British heavyweight champions can do at world level. But either way, Henry Cooper dropped Cassius Clay hard, and Cassius Clay did not drop him back. Cooper's corner threw the towel in due to the cut, and Cooper was still the champion of Britain after that loss, the title which is the focus of this video. Henry Cooper would be defending his British and Empire titles in his next fight after the loss to Clay, as he'd be taking on Brian London in a trilogy bout at the King's Hall in Manchester on February 24th, 1964, just one day before Clay would dethrone Liston for the World Heavyweight title. This was the very Brian London who Henry Cooper won the British and Commonwealth titles from in 1959, but this time around, the vacant EBU heavyweight title was on the line. The European title, that is. This belt was left vacant by none other than the former world heavyweight champion Ingemar Johansson. Henry Cooper would outpoint Brian London over the 15 rounds in this 3rd meeting to whitewash London in the trilogy, retain his British and Commonwealth heavyweight titles, and become the new heavyweight champion of Europe. Henry Cooper held 3 belts and he was on top of the world, or on top of the continent, shall we say. Now, Henry Cooper went on to be stripped of the European heavyweight title in September of 1964 for not fighting his German mandatory challenger, Karl Mildenberger. Remember that name, Karl Mildenberger. In October, Mildenberger won the vacant EBU heavyweight title with a 1st round knockout win over the Italian Santo Amonte. After his 5th defence of his British and Empire titles in that trilogy fight with Brian London, and after being stripped of his European title, Henry Cooper's next 3 fights would be non-title fights scheduled for 10 rounds against Americans coming over to England to fight Cooper. Cooper lost on points to Roger Reicher in November of 1964, and moving on to 1965, he would stop Dick Whipperman in January and stop Matthew Johnson in April. Henry Cooper would be making his 6th defence of the Lonsdale belt against former Midlands area heavyweight champion Johnny Prescott at St Andrew Stadium in Prescott's home city Birmingham in June 1965. This fight was meant to be on the 15th of June but got postponed to the 17th due to rain. Johnny Prescott wasn't even a professional boxer yet when Henry Cooper became British champ, so Henry Cooper was taking on a relative newcomer in this defence, unlike his other challengers to that point who were all prevalent on the British heavyweight title scene in the 50s. Henry Cooper would drop Prescott once in the 8th round and then twice in the 10th round. Subsequently, Prescott did not come out for the 11th round, so Cooper had remained the British and Empire heavyweight champion by way of a stoppage victory. Much like after his last British title defence, Henry Cooper would be having 3 consecutive non-title fights against travelling Americans, again losing on points in the first one and then gaining 2 stoppage victories in the next 2. And those 2 stoppage wins over Americans takes us to May 21st of 1966, when Henry Cooper's paths would cross with Cassius Clay again, who was now known as Muhammad Ali. This rematch with Ali would be Henry Cooper's one and only shot at a world title. As aforementioned, Ali won the world title in his very next fight after his win over Cooper in 1963. And now going into the rematch, Ali was the reigning and defending world heavyweight champion, coming off of 3 consecutive title defences. This rematch was taking place at the old Arsenal Stadium in Highbury and drew a live crowd of 46,000 observers, which broke the record for the highest live audience for a British boxing match at the time, and remained the record holder for over 40 years. This rematch also grossed more money than the World Cup final in Wembley Stadium would 2 months after this, so it's fair to say that Ali vs Cooper 2 was a historical event in British sport. Ali was much more respectful in the build-up to the rematch. He wasn't calling Cooper a bum, he refused to predict a round that he'd win the fight in, and he was expressing his wariness of Cooper's left hook, Henry's hammer. So, could Henry Cooper get the win over Ali this time now that there was a world title on the line? Or would Ali prove to be too good again? Or would Cooper's scar tissue around his left eye cause his demise again? Now, despite the higher stakes, the second fight would not be as exciting as the first. Cooper wasn't putting it on Ali as much, and Ali wasn't as active with those straight punches on the back foot, and the referee would have to break quite a bit of holding here. In the fourth round, the action would pick up a bit as Cooper would try to come forward a bit more, and Ali was more active with his punches here. Ali was still too elusive for Cooper in the fifth, gliding around that ring, touching him with jabs at will. And in the sixth round, a couple of right hands from Ali would open up that cut above Cooper's eye badly. Cooper instantly started bleeding profusely, so he tried to quickly push the action as much as he could before being pulled out of the fight again. But Ali was just teeing off on Cooper and the referee stopped the fight. That was it. His bugbear had cost him again. Henry Cooper had got stopped due to cuts yet again against Muhammad Ali. As much as Ali was the far better boxer than Cooper and likely would have gone on to win both fights against him, it's a shame that Cooper had to be stopped on cuts in both outings, especially in a world title fight this time around. Cooper actually went on to say that he believed that he would have been heavyweight champion of the world if it wasn't for his propensity to be cut.
See, if I'd have been a Negro with negroid features, flat or rounder features, which Negroes have, I would have been world heavyweight champion. It's as simple as that, I think, anyway, yeah.
Henry was still the heavyweight champion of Great Britain after falling short in that world title fight with Ali though, of course. But he wouldn't be having a British title defence next up like he was after his last fight with Ali back in '63. This time, he would be having a second fight against a world-class American in a row, as former two-time heavyweight champion of the world and the youngest ever heavyweight champion of the world Floyd Patterson would be coming to England to duke it out with Henry Cooper at the old Wembley Arena on September 20th, 1966. Now, there was a bit of history behind this Patterson vs Cooper fight. So both guys were coming off of failed attempts at Ali's world title in their last fight, Cooper's shot at Ali being his first and only ever world title shot. But Cooper could have had his first world title shot 7 years before that, as he had the opportunity to go to America to fight Floyd Patterson for his world title in 1959 after winning the British title from Brian London. But Cooper's manager Jim Wicks turned that fight down, and that's how the loser of the British title fight, Brian London, ended up with the shot at Floyd Patterson's title over in the States. But now Cooper would be fighting Patterson 7 years on in a non-title bout in merry old England. Could Cooper get the better of a Floyd Patterson who had just suffered his fourth career stoppage loss at the hands of Ali? Or would Cooper's scar tissue cost him again like it did in both Ali fights? Well, cuts wouldn't be the problem for Cooper in this fight with Patterson. In all honesty, Floyd Patterson gave Henry Cooper a hiding here. Patterson stopped him in the fourth round behind 3 knockdowns, the third and final of which being pretty brutal. So that result spelled back-to-back losses for the heavyweight champion of Great Britain. But those losses were to the elite of the elite, Muhammad Ali and Floyd Patterson. But would Cooper's British foes remain no match for him, as had been the case for the last 8 odd years? Cooper would bounce back from the loss to Patterson with a points victory in a non-title fight in April of 1967. And then on June 13th, Cooper would be making British title defence number 7 and his first British title defence in 2 years against, spoiler alert, future heavyweight champion of Great Britain Jack Bodell at the Molineux in Wolves. Much like Cooper's last challenger Johnny Prescott, Bodell hadn't even started his professional career when Cooper won the British title that he was defending against Bodell here. This is an indictment of how lengthy Cooper's legendary British title reign was. The southpaw Bodell gave Cooper a tough first round, and he opened up a cut between Cooper's eyes early in the second round. But later in the second round, Cooper would start relentlessly swinging with that hammering left hook in an onslaught that left Bodell hanging on the ropes, forcing the referee to stop the fight. Cooper was the winner by TKO in the second round, and he was still the heavyweight champion of Great Britain and the Commonwealth. The 33-year-old Cooper had been British champ for just shy of 8.5 years at that point, making him the longest reigning British champion of all time, surpassing the length of the inaugural Lonsdale belt era champion Bombardier Billy Wells's reign, which was a couple months shy of 8 years. For the first time in over 4.5 years, Henry Cooper would be making his second British title defence in a row, as in his second consecutive fight that is a defence of his British title. You know, there are a lot of non-title fights in between his other defences. This second consecutive defence came on November 7th, 1967, as Henry Cooper would be defending his British title for the 8th time in total against fellow Londoner Billy Walker at the Empire Pool, the old Wembley Arena. Billy Walker was known as the Golden Boy due to his ability to draw crowds, and he was backed by the Boxing Syndicate, or the Boxing Cartel as they were known as in Britain. We're talking Mickey Duff and Jarvis Astaire. They were pushing Billy Walker as the next big TV star. But Henry Cooper, he was independent from the big promoters. So could this popular new challenger end Cooper's reign? Cooper was not mucking about with the Golden Boy in there. The power punches he was throwing had led to a bad cut above Walker's right eye by the end of the 5th round. Walker's face was looking worse for wear all round from the bleeding, and the referee would stop the fight during round 6 due to Walker's cut. Wow, Henry Cooper actually won a fight that had to be stopped due to a cut. It was his opponent who was left bleeding profusely this time. Cooper did have a nick above his left eye in this fight, but that's no news at this point, is it? So Cooper remained British and Commonwealth heavyweight champion, and he was 8 defences deep into his British title reign. And 9 defences deep into his Commonwealth title reign, just to note. He'd held both titles for the same length of time, but had that one lone Commonwealth title defence back in '59. With the win over Billy Walker, Henry Cooper had also become the only ever fighter to win 3 Lonsdale belts. In those days, you had to win 3 British title fights, including the one in which you win the title, then defences of that title that you just won, to win a Lonsdale belt outright, which means you will win the belt outright after 2 defences. And any subsequent trifecta of British title fight victories would have won you another belt outright. And after title defence number 8, Cooper had of course won 9 British title fights, so 3 of those precious Lonsdale belts belonged to him forever. By the way, as of 1999, a fighter has to win 4 British title fights to win a Lonsdale belt outright. And as of 1987, you can't win more than 1 Lonsdale belt outright in a single weight class. And they didn't award multiple Lonsdale belts to a single fighter since the start of the belt's existence. Otherwise, Billy Wells would have won 4 belts outright. The time period of British champions being awarded more than 1 Lonsdale belt outright within a single weight class lasted from 1934 to 1987, and for that period that lasted over half a century, Henry Cooper is one of just 7 fighters to win a Lonsdale belt outright more than once. He is the only heavyweight to win a belt outright more than once, and again, he's the only ever fighter to win 3 Lonsdale belts outright across any weight class. Now if you remember, during this lengthy British and Commonwealth title reign, Cooper was stripped of his European title for not fighting the mandatory challenger for that title, Carl Mildenberger, and then Mildenberger won that title in a vacant title fight. Well, since becoming European champion '64, Mildenberger had made 6 defences of that coveted EBU title, and he also challenged for Muhammad Ali's world title during his European title reign too, becoming the first ever Southpaw world heavyweight title challenger in doing so. Now while Henry, the champion of Great Britain, would be attempting to win the European title back off the man who won the title that he was stripped of and became a reigning and defending champion. On September 18th, 1968, Cooper would be challenging for Mildenberger's European title at the Empire Pool. In the fight, Cooper was leading on points, getting the better of Mildenberger with his left jab, and in the 8th round, Mildenberger hit Cooper with a headbutt which forced the referee to disqualify the German. By way of a DQ victory, Henry Cooper was the heavyweight champion of Europe again, and he stood proudly as a champion who held 3 titles again, holding the British, Commonwealth and European titles all together like he did back in '64. Carl Mildenberger retired after losing his European title to Cooper, and he said that he would have retired after the Cooper fight either way, win, lose or draw. Henry Cooper had his eyes set on a fight with the WBA World Heavyweight Champion Jimmy Ellis after the win over Mildenberger. Now, Cooper would not be taking on Ellis for the world title next, as unlike in his last European title reign, he would be defending that EBU European Heavyweight title. He was off to Rome to defend the title against the Italian Piero Tomasoni. In this fight, Tomasoni got hometown treatment, as he hit Cooper low in the first round, and when Cooper went down after his groin guard got caved into his bollocks, the ref just counted it as a knockdown against Cooper. The Italian continued to punch Cooper's bollocks off for the next few rounds, as the ref would just allow him to get away with it. So with his back against the wall, Cooper upped the ante and knocked Tomasoni out in the 5th round to defend his title on away soil. The Italian crowd were throwing food at Henry Cooper after he beat their man. After the fight, Cooper said that Tomasoni could have finished off his wedding delights forever with those low blows. Cooper's win over Tomasoni was the 2-time European champion's first European title defence. After defending his European title, Henry Cooper was still set on fighting Jimmy Ellis for the WBA world title, but the British Boxing Board of Control did not recognise the WBA, so they would not sanction Cooper versus Ellis. Henry Cooper therefore gave up his British heavyweight title in protest. After that decade-long reign that consisted of 8 title defences, Cooper vacated his title just like that. Despite the British Boxing Board of Control's disapproval of the WBA title, Cooper vs Ellis eventually got made for September 27th at the Empire Pool. But then that September bout had to be cancelled as Cooper had to receive surgery for an injury on his right knee. In October, Jack Bodell, who went on a very impressive 11-fight winning streak since losing in that title fight to Henry Cooper back in 1967, won the vacant British heavyweight title with a 15-round points victory over the Welshman Carl Gizzi. Jack Bodell became the first ever Southpaw heavyweight champion of Great Britain. After pulling out of the Jimmy Ellis fight with an injury, Cooper also vacated his European title, and the vacant title would be picked up by Peter Weiland of Germany in December. So Cooper started 1969 with 3 titles, he fought once in the year and won, and he ended 1969 with just 1 title, the Commonwealth title / British Empire title. Now, after vacating the British heavyweight title because of that whole situation with him pursuing the Jimmy Ellis fight, Henry Cooper would find himself challenging for Jack Bodell's British heavyweight title in his next fight on March 24th, 1970 at the Empire Pool. Of course, Cooper had previously knocked Bodell out in the second round in a title defence, and it's funny because Bodell had just won the vacant title off of Carl Gizzi, a man who he had previously knocked out in the second round. In Cooper vs Bodell 2, Cooper would drop Bodell a couple of times and do a good bit of damage as the fight went on to win a 15-round points decision. The British and Commonwealth titles were reunified, and Cooper had got his British title back to become a 2-time heavyweight champion of Great Britain at the age of 35, which was old for a heavyweight boxer back then. This rematch with Bodell was Cooper's first time going the 15-round distance in over 6 years, since his title defence against Brian London in 1964. After the national hero Henry Cooper impressed the country again and won his British title back in his old age, he'd only be attempting to become a 3-time European heavyweight champion in his very next fight. After Peter Weiland won the title left vacant by Cooper in late 1969, he lost it to the Spaniard Jose Manuel Urtain in his very next fight in April of 1970. Urtain made a successful title defence in June, and then that takes us to the 10th of November 1917, when Urtain would be coming over to England to put his Euro title on the line against the British and Empire champ Henry Cooper. In the opening round of this European heavyweight title fight, Urtain would cause quite a bad cut over Henry Cooper's left eye. Nothing new there. Cooper's cut was caused by a mix of punches and head clashes, as Urtain was leading in with the head. As the fight went on, Cooper's corner would do a great job of taking care of his cut, and Cooper would quite comfortably outbox Urtain as the rounds went on, making Urtain look hopeless in there in quite a tame and uneventful affair. And by the 8th round, the damage was wearing on Urtain's face, as his right eye was swelled shut. Urtain's corner would not allow him to come out for the 9th round, so Henry Cooper was the winner by TKO and had become the European heavyweight champion once again at 36 years old. Henry Cooper had achieved greatness yet again. He had unified the British, European and Commonwealth titles together again for the 3rd time. He was a 3-time heavyweight champion of Europe now, with a record of 4-0 in European title fights. He was a 2-time British champion, and he had been the Commonwealth champion for nearly 12 years straight at the point of this win over Jose Manuel Urtain. Perhaps Cooper couldn't quite cut it at world level, which is no shame, as his few chances to showcase himself on the world stage were against the elite of the elite, 3 fights against 2 all-time greats. But he was on a 7-fight winning streak since that loss to Floyd Patterson in '66, with the last 6 of those 7 wins being in title fights. So surely nobody on the European, British nor Commonwealth scene could stop the great Henry Cooper, just as they hadn't been able to for the last decade plus. He was too dominant. Granted, he was getting on in age at this point in 1970, but when asked about potential retirement after the victory over Urtain, Cooper said that he's just getting his second wind. Just 8 days after Joe Frazier defeated Muhammad Ali in the fight of the century at Madison Square Gardens on March 16, 1971, a 36-year-old Henry Cooper would be for the first time defending the British, Commonwealth and European heavyweight titles all at once, as he put it all on the line against the just-turned 21-year-old Hungarian-born British heavyweight Joe Bugner at the Empire Pool in Wembley. The old and then injury-ridden Henry Cooper would express a couple of weeks before this fight with Joe Bugner that he looked to retire as champion after beating Bugner, a change of heart from his post-fight comments following his last fight against Jose Manuel Urtain. By the way, the young strapping Joe Bugner was one of those upstarts backed by the boxing cartel, just like Billy Walker was. So this was the cartel's second shot at taking Henry Cooper's British title, so to speak. Now this fight between Cooper and Bugner wound up being a fairly uneventful 15-round affair that Cooper looked to have gotten the better of against his much bigger opponent. It would look as if Cooper racked up points early with how he was working with the jab, but Joe Bugner would have some success jabbing with Cooper at times, and he used his size advantage to bother Cooper a couple of times and hurt him to the body. In the last third of the fight, Cooper did get through with some power shots in the flurries that he was throwing. He couldn't put a dent in the big Adonis Joe Bugner, but Cooper was scoring with the shots. And finally, Joe Bugner was nice and active in the 15th and final round, the most exciting round of the fight. Bugner landed some real solid jabs in that round. This fight was very competitive, and its all-round uneventfulness was a consequence of both fighters' approaches. Cooper only really got through with Henry's hammer a couple or 3 times in this whole 15-rounder. And right after the final bell rang, the referee Harry Gibbs, who was the lone judge of the fight, raised Joe Bugner's hand in victory.
And said, well done, and he's given it to Bugner. He's given it to Joe Bugner, and I find that amazing. He's given it to Joe Bugner, and Cooper has lost 3 titles. And that I do not understand. And the whole of Wembley erupts into a storm of going. And how in the world can you take away the man's 3 titles like that? And Cooper has taken it so well. And the booing erupts again, and police fall at the ringside. A great cordon of police. Bugner is champion of Britain, of Europe and the Commonwealth, but nobody in the arena believes it to be true. It's a hollow victory then for Joe Bugner. And nothing but despondency and dejection, and I should think damn near despair, for Cooper.
As BBC commentator Harry Carpenter's comments there well outline, the all-round public reaction to Joe Bugner being awarded this decision against the national hero Henry Cooper, who was Henry Cooper OBE at the time, was that of outrage. No way the long-reigning British Empire champion who dominated the British heavyweight title scene for over a decade and totaled 10 British title fight victories had lost all 3 of his titles like that. The coveted Lonsdale belts now belonged around the waist of the 21-year-old Hungarian-born kid, and our Henry would have to retire having lost all of his titles. Referee Harry Gibbs had scored the fight to Bugner by 1/4 of a point, with the total final score being 73 3/4 points to 73.5 points in Joe Bugner's favour. That is how fights in Britain were scored back then, with 1/2 and 1/4 points. So yes, the public's all-round adoration of Henry Cooper and the collective dismay with the fact that the referee scored the fight to Joe Bugner by an arbitrary 1/4 of a point in our Henry's farewell fight concocted an adulterated level of outrage from the press towards Joe Bugner's British heavyweight title fight victory. The vast majority of news outlets had Henry Cooper winning the fight, with the Daily Mirror for instance saying that it wasn't even close. And one giving an opinion on how they reckon the fight ought to have been scored is all well and good, and opining that it is unfair for the legend Henry Cooper to go out like that is all well and good too. But unfortunately, a lot of the public outrage manifested in the form of negative press towards Joe Bugner himself, and it was pretty brutal. While the fight was actually competitive, although Cooper may have looked like the winner, it was very closely contested. Even if the fight wasn't even close and Cooper was outright robbed in a fight that he dominated, it is still fair to say that the utter contempt towards Joe Bugner expressed by the whole nation was very harsh. The contempt came in the form of rejecting Bugner's status as a Brit and speaking of Bugner as this overly tame and cautious fighter between the ropes. A boring fighter in other words. In terms of Joe Bugner's status as a Brit, well, the night he beat Henry Cooper, he became the second ever British heavyweight champion that wasn't born in Britain in the title's then 65-year history. The only other non-British born British heavyweight champ before Joe Bugner was the South African Ben Foord, who became champion in 1936. So, Joe Bugner was born in Hungary in 1950, and his family fled Hungary in 1956 as a result of the Soviet invasion. So this would have of course been when Bugner was just a young kid, and his family settled in Cambridge, England after escaping Hungary. so Bugner would have went to school in England and started boxing in England. But now that he got his hand raised against the beloved Henry Cooper in Cooper's final fight, all of a sudden he was just this Hungarian asylum seeker that had no business being the heavyweight champion of Great Britain. It's almost like winning the British heavyweight title and becoming the youngest ever holder of that title was the worst thing that could have happened to young Joe Bugner. As much as the Cooper vs Bugner fight wasn't very eventful in the ring, the legend of that, which was Henry Cooper's final fight, lived on for decades to come. Unfortunately, mainly in the form of haunting Joe Bugner throughout the rest of his boxing career, a career which would continue on for a long time after his win over Cooper, which I will get to. Given the level of public hostility towards Joe Bugner as a result of him getting the nod over Cooper, the Cooper vs Bugner fight will probably remain to be the most bitter passing of the torch fight in boxing history. Some fans reckon that the referee Harry Gibbs gave the fight to Joe Bugner because Henry Cooper had essentially confirmed his retirement before the fight took place. I mean, that does save the British Boxing Board of Control and the promoters the bother of setting up a vacant British title fight, and it assured that the Commonwealth and European heavyweight titles stayed in Britain. So that idea isn't so far-fetched. And there's the whole thing about Joe Bugner having the political backing from the boxing cartel or syndicate. By the way, referee Harry Gibbs' decision in raising Joe Bugner's hand on that fateful night actually created quite the feud between Gibbs and Henry Cooper. Harry Gibbs ended up successfully suing Henry Cooper for libel as a result of Cooper making suggestions about Gibbs' ulterior motives in scoring the fight to Bugner in his 1972 autobiography. But anyway, that was all she wrote for London's own Henry Cooper. He ended his career as a national darling. He was the longest reigning British heavyweight champion of all time, the only 3-time Lonsdale belt winner, he has the most Commonwealth heavyweight title defences of all time, and he was a 3-time heavyweight champion of Europe. Cooper ended his career with a record of 40, 14 and 1, which may seem humble by today's standards, but before that win over Dick Richardson in 1958 that changed his career, he had a record of 15, 7 and 1, so he improved his winning ratio quite a bit there. Herbie will always be remembered as arguably the greatest British heavyweight champion of all time. He was a man of the people who was independent and fought against the boxing cartel, and he was the man who gave British heavyweight boxing hope when he floored Muhammad Ali with old Henry's hammer. Henry Cooper received an OBE for his services to charity during his boxing career in 1969. He won the BBC Sports Personality of the Year award in both 1967 and 1970, becoming the first boxer to win the award and the first ever 2-time winner of the award, and in the year 2000, Henry would be knighted and become known as Sir Henry Cooper. Sir Henry Cooper is the only ever boxer to be knighted. This former heavyweight champion of Great Britain sure was an iconic figure in British sports history, and British history all round. Now, I did say earlier that winning a Lonsdale belt outright means that you keep the belt forever, and Cooper did the unthinkable and won 3 belts outright, of course. But unfortunately, Cooper sold all 3 of his Lonsdale belts in 1993 as a result of getting into a bit of financial bother. But either way, his name is firmly etched into the history of the British heavyweight title. He was the most iconic champion of them all. But now to get back to Joe Bugner, the then new champion in 1971, the kid who carried the burden of that close decision victory over the national hero Henry Cooper, as he was consequently treated like he malevolently robbed Cooper of all of his glory. He would make a successful European title defence against Germany's Jürgen Blin at the Wembley Empire Pool within 2 months of defeating Cooper. And then on the 27th of September 1971, Bugner would be putting his British, Commonwealth and European titles on the line against former British heavyweight title holder and 2-time Henry Cooper victim Jack Bodell at the Empire Pool. Due to the love for Henry Cooper, the crowd cheered against Bugner in his last British title fight against Cooper. The Wembley crowd were going, "Henry, Henry, Henry" in that outing. But this time around, the crowd would be spurring on Jack Bodell and cheering in adulation for all of Bodell's attacks in the early going, mainly in spite of British boxing's new villain, Joe Bugner. Throughout the rounds, the more experienced Jack Bodell would completely outwork a fairly inactive Joe Bugner. Very inactive at some points of the fight, in fact. And Bugner continued to gain more of a reputation for a low work rate from this point on in his career. The southpaw Bodell would just be moving around the ring pop-shotting Bugner, with ease at times it appeared. He was scoring with good straight lefts to the chin and coming in with some flourish to the body as Bugner sort of just stood there. The much bigger man in the contest, Joe Bugner, looked as if he could turn things around in the 12th round, as he had Bodell hurt a couple of times. But Bugner just did not do enough to properly press the issue and get Bodell out of there. Bodell did show great heart to fight back after being rocked by the bigger and younger man a couple of times though, to be fair, and this made for quite an exciting 12th round. Bugner's chances of winning were looking slimmer after Bodell survived the 12th, and Bodell even dropped Bugner at the end of the 14th. After the 15 rounds had concluded, Jack Bodell won the fight on points. Referee George Smith had it 74 3/4 points to 71.5 points in Bodell's favour. Jack Bodell had pulled off the upset and become the new British, Commonwealth and European heavyweight champion, the full package. The man from Derbyshire had become a 2-time heavyweight champion of Great Britain with this victory over Joe Bugner, and he picked up the European and Commonwealth titles for the first time. So that was it. Joe Bugner was no longer British heavyweight champion. He made no successful defences of that precious Lonsdale belt that he won against the great Henry Cooper in controversial fashion. Just half a year after that win that led to all of that hostility towards him, he had lost the title to a man that R. Henry had beaten twice. But this isn't the last we'll be hearing of Joe Bugner in this British heavyweight title timeline, so do stay tuned. Now, it certainly wasn't smooth sailing for Jack Bodell after he dethroned Joe Bugner and won those 3 titles that once belonged to the now retired Henry Cooper earlier in the year. Bodell would be back in the ring in a non-title bout at the Empire Pool just 2 months after the Bugner fight, as world-class American contender Jerry Currie would be coming over to England to take him on. Jerry Currie would chin Jack Bodell in the very first round. Just a month after that, Bodell would be off to Madrid to make a European title defence against the former European champion and the last man who Henry Cooper beat, Jose Manuel Urtain. Urtain would demolish Bodell inside 2 rounds to become a 2-time heavyweight champion of Europe. So within 3 months of beating Bugner for the British, Commonwealth and European titles, Bodell had been stopped twice within 2 rounds twice and lost his European title, but he was still British and Commonwealth champion. On June 27th, 1972, Jack Bodell would be defending his British title for the first time in his second title reign against the Northern Irishman Danny McAlinden at Villa Park. The British and Commonwealth titles were on the line here, of course. To share a fun little fact about Danny McAlinden here, he became the first ever British heavyweight to win a fight at Madison Square Gardens, as on the undercard of Muhammad Ali vs Joe Frazier back in March 1971, McAlinden defeated Muhammad Ali's brother Rahman Ali on points in a 6-rounder. 35 years after McAlinden's win over Ali, a guy we'll hear more about later called Lennox Lewis became the only other British heavyweight in history to win a fight at Madison Square Gardens up until now. And another British heavyweight who we'll hear more about later called Anthony Joshua fell short when he fought at MSG. Now this British title fight between Jack Bodell and Danny McAlinden was a wild one from the start. There was a scrappy opening round which saw the 2 men rolling around on the floor, McAlinden hurting Bodell and an out of it Bodell hitting McAlinden way after the bell.
And Bodell is going, but the bell's going to rescue him. And Bodell throws one after the bell because he's so confused and dazed. He doesn't know where he is, and look at his legs. He's gone.
McAlinden would relentlessly pursue a finish against the weathered Jack Bodell in the second round. He would drop Bodell through the ropes, and after Bodell managed to make the count, McAlinden dropped him again, and that was all she wrote. Danny McAlinden had won by a 2nd round knockout to become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. He had become the first Northern Irishman to win the British heavyweight title. Jack Bodell would never box again after losing the title to McAlinden. Unfortunately, Jack Bodell did go out sad. He was stopped within 2 rounds in all of his last 3 fights, and he lost all of his titles in the process. Joe Bugner's decisive points loss to Jack Bodell was aging badly, wasn't it? But now, no matter how Jack Bodell's career ended, he will always go down as a 2-time holder of that precious Lonsdale belt in the Premier Division of boxing, and the first ever southpaw holder of the title. He was a very nice southpaw boxer. Now, the new British and Commonwealth heavyweight champion Danny McAlinden would hold those titles for over 2.5 years without defending them. He was too busy fighting Americans. The Northern Irishman first put his British and Commonwealth heavyweight titles on the line against the Jamaican-born Barney Johnson at the Grosvenor House on January 13th, 1975. Barney Johnson would knock McAlinden out in the 9th round to become the first ever black heavyweight champion of Great Britain 70 years into the title's history. Now, that might make it seem like it took 70 years for a black fighter to win the British heavyweight title, but it might be worth noting that the collar bar in British boxing outlawed black fighters fighting for the Lonsdale belt, and the collar bar was not abolished until 1948. So it would be more accurate to say that it took 27 years for a black fighter to become British heavyweight champ. The first ever black Lonsdale belt winner across the weight categories was Dick Turpin, who won the British middleweight title in 1948. Between Dick Turpin becoming the first black British champion and Barney Johnson becoming the first black British heavyweight champion, 3 other black fighters had become Lonsdale belt winners, with Dick's brother Randy Turpin becoming a 3-time champ across 2 weight divisions. After winning the British heavyweight title in 1975, Bonnie Johnson went on to gain 4 non-title fight victories against fighters from the Americas, and would be first defending the British title against Richard Dunn on September 30th at the Empire Pool in Wembley. This was a rubber match between Bonnie Johnson and Richard Dunn, as Johnson gained a 10th round KO victory over Dunn in a British heavyweight title eliminator back in 73, and Dunn gained an 8 round points victory over Johnson back in 71. In this 1975 rematch with the title on the line, Richard Dunn would outpoint Bonnie Johnson over the 15 rounds to win the trilogy with Johnson and become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain and the Commonwealth. Richard Dunn would be making his first defence of the British and Commonwealth titles at the Empire Pool just over a month after winning the titles, on November 4th. Dunn would be up against former British champion Danny McAlinden, the same McAlinden who had previously stopped Richard Dunn in the first round in what was both men's pro debut. Dunn avenged that loss from 9 years prior by knocking McAlinden out in the second round to remain champion. Dunn then gained a stoppage victory later that month in a non-title fight. In April of 1976, Richard Dunn would be taking on German heavyweights Bernd August for the vacant European heavyweight title at the Royal Albert Hall. Dunn stopped the German in the third round to reunify the Euro title with the British and Commonwealth titles, and this European title fight victory set up an undisputed world title shot against Muhammad Ali in Germany on May 24th of 1976. Ali stopped Richard Dunn in the 5th round in that affair. Then on October 12th of 1976, Richard Dunn would be defending the British, Commonwealth and European heavyweight titles against a former holder of all 3 of those titles and the last man to hold the European heavyweight title before he won the vacant title, Joe Bugner. Joe Bugner had been up to a lot since losing the British, Commonwealth and European titles to the now retired Jack Bodell back in 72. Jurgen Blin, the man who Bugner made a European title defence against in his first reign as champion in 71, won the European title in his third shot at the title in a rematch against Jose Manuel Urtain in June of 72. Blin would rematch Joe Bugner in October, and Bugner defeated Blin again to become a 2-time European champ. After 2 non-title fight victories, Bugner made a successful defence of his European title in January 1973. Less than a month later, Bugner would be off to Vegas taking on Muhammad Ali in a 12-round non-title bout. Ali would of course fairly comfortably outbox a 22-year-old Joe Bugner in one-sided fashion, but Joe Bugner did put on a decent losing effort to hang in there and take Ali the 12-round distance, and after the 12, Bugner lost by a unanimous decision. In July of 1973, former world champion Joe Frazier, who was coming off of the fight in which he lost his world titles and his undefeated record against Big George Foreman, would be coming over to England to take on Joe Bugner in a 12-round non-title affair at the Earl's Court. Joe Bugner would get stuck right in there with Smokin' Joe and engage in a spirited battle with him. Bugner got dropped hard by Frazier's infamous left hook in the 10th round, but Bugner showed great heart to get up and fight on, and he would make it the 12-round distance with an elite opponent for the second fight in a row. Joe Frazier's left eye swelled up badly after the 12 rounds thanks to the damage that Bugner had done. Referee Harry Gibbs scored the fight to Joe Frazier by 3/4 of a point. Joe Bugner's next fight after Frazier would be a successful defence of his Euro title later in the year. Then after 2 non-title fight victories, he would make European title defence number 4 of his second reign as European champ in May of 1974. And then after 4 non-title fight victories, including a win over former WBA World Heavyweight Champion Jimmy Ellis, Joe Bugner would be taking on Muhammad Ali again, this time for the undisputed World Heavyweight title, as Ali won the title from George Foreman since Bugner last fought him. This rematch between Ali and Bugner took place on June 30th of 1975 in Kuala Lumpur, and it was Bugner's first crack at a world title. With the weight of Great Britain on his shoulders, Joe Bugner put on quite a low output and low effort performance against Ali this time around, that sort of cautious and tame type of performance that he was stigmatised for. And after 15 fairly uneventful rounds, Ali was awarded a unanimous decision and kept his titles. Joe Bugner went the 15-round distance with Ali this time and never really got hurt by the champion, but that's not the fight that the fans were looking for, and the British press absolutely scorned Bugner for his timid performance. He was seen as somewhat of a coward. In reaction to the fight, a British journalist went as far as to say that Joe Bugner has the body of a Greek statue, but fewer moves. Joe Bugner took a break from boxing after what the public deemed to be a disgrace of a performance in the Ali rematch. Bugner actually announced his retirement from boxing in early 1976 and vacated his European title, which led to the British and Commonwealth champion Richard Dunn winning the vacant European title in Bugner's absence. And that takes us to the return of Joe Bugner on October 12, 1976, in which he took on Richard Dunn for the British, Commonwealth and European titles, with both men coming off of losses to Ali in world title fights. Dunn's fight with Ali coming a lot more recently than Bugner's and being seen as a much more spirited losing effort by the British public. The villain Joe Bugner made it clear that he was not impressed with Richard Dunn's losing efforts against Ali, and his antagonising comments about the Ali vs Dunn fight made the public side with Richard Dunn even more, and all of this made Dunn vs Bugner quite the grudge fight. Joe Bugner carried a chip on his shoulder after his year plus of inactivity and supposedly disgraceful performance against Ali, and he got in there and just rushed Richard Dunn, dropping him 6 seconds into the fight. Bugner was relentless in there and dropped Dunn again shortly after the first knockdown, and later in the round, Bugner would drop Richard Dunn for the third time. Dunn tried to make the count, but he fell over again after he got up. The man who was known to be a passive and timid boxer came back and put on a spiteful performance to win back the British, Commonwealth and European heavyweight titles, becoming a 2-time British and Commonwealth champ and a 3-time European champ, with a total record of 8-1 in European title fights. Joe Bugner would make no defences of those 3 titles this time around, and would never compete for any of them again, so that is the last we'll be hearing of him in this British heavyweight title timeline. Joe Bugner would continue to fight a who's who of heavyweight boxing names throughout the rest of his career, with a fair bit of inactivity between fights, fighting big American names in Ron Lau, Ernie Shavers and Marvis Frazier. Joe Bugner continued to be haunted by that publicly disputed win against Henry Cooper back in 1971, and in 1986, the man who the British fans would never support moved over to Australia, becoming an Australian citizen, and he adopted the nickname Aussie Joe. Starting in September of 1986, Joe Bugner gained 3 consecutive victories over well-regarded American names in the form of James Tillis, David Bay, and former world heavyweight champion Greg Page. Joe Bugner would be back to England for a stadium fight against a fellow Brit in October 1987, as he'd be taken on the then 1-time former world heavyweight title challenger Frank Bruno at White Hart Lane. Frank Bruno was a nice guy who was loved by the British press. He was a second coming of Henry Cooper, if you will. And Joe Bugner, the Hungarian-born fighter who had now defected to Australia, was not welcome back to Britain with open arms at all. He was still haunted by getting his hand raised against a man who'd been retired for over 16 years at that point. Bugner was tagged the most unpopular man in British sports going into the Bruno fight, and he expressed his dismay with the negativity towards him from the British press in the build-up.
The fight will be not an easy one, but it'll be one that I've been dreaming of and hoping for a long time, so it'll make it that much more exciting and that much more determination on my part, because, you know, I've been taking a lot of flack from the British press and I've had enough of it.
Well, before we talk about that, why has this fight been so important to you?
Well, you know, because unfortunately for something like 15, 16 years, I've been living the life of hell as far as the British press were concerned. And, you know, every time I performed well, in my opinion, they said I was not performing well. Obviously, you can't sort of please everybody all the time, but in their eyes, I could never please them at all. So I just got sick and tired of it. And when this young man came along, Bruno, who they praised as one of the greatest fighters Britain's ever had, I just got my back up, you know, I said, that's it.
Why do you think the press have been gunning for you?
Well, I think the reason for that has been mainly because of maybe that I've been very outspoken about the previous heavyweights of this country. And, you know, in this country, if you happen to be a winner, they don't like you. They like to have good losers in this country, and it's very sad because, you know, you've got some great athletes in this country, and they just seem to knock them as soon as they make the grade.
In the past, you've actually been described as quite a cool customer in the ring, and even been described as boring, perhaps, boring boxing. Are you going to be very aggressive on Saturday, or are you going to be that cool customer?
A lot depends on the situation, I mean, how it arises. I mean, as far as the boxing side goes, I mean, again, the boring side obviously has been, you've been reading some of the clippings, so some of my fellow journalist friends, you know, out there who've been always the, you know, the big mouths anyway, I don't really want to harp on about. No, the fight's going to be dominated by me, I'm pretty sure of it.
What about all the hype that's accompanying it?
Well, believe me, without Joe Bugner, there'd not be 30,000 people coming to the fight. I don't think Bruno can fill a stadium of the size of the Albert Hall, and it doesn't matter who he fought. So I think without Joe Bugner, it'd be a very limited amount of people there.
You said that you'll be able to finish the business within 10 rounds.
8 rounds.
8 rounds?
Don't put 2 extra rounds on it.
It's going to be 8 rounds. In all the run-up to this fight, you've been opening your mouth, if you like, and being very vocal in press conferences.
Not vocal. I've been positive. What they don't seem to like in this country is that when you say what you think, and as soon as you open your mouth, everybody tries to put their foot into your mouth. And I've had this problem for 20 years, and it's sad. Everybody says, why do I say so much? Because there's nobody else out there who dares say anything else. And it sickens me to find out all these people are hiding behind closed doors and behind women's skirts, and you guys out there, open your traps.
Sounds as though you're going to be fighting an awful lot more other things than Frank Bruno when you go into that room.
I'm fighting the whole of Fleet Street. Now that's for the books and the records.
But you've been tagged the most unpopular man in British sport, haven't you?
Isn't that wonderful, Graham? That's why we're coming to Spurs, because we're going to fill this place, and when I knock him out, they're going to love me again.
Joe Bugner would be stopped by Bruno in the 8th round, much to the delight of the London crowd, and he was sent back into retirement. Aussie Joe then went on to make another return to boxing in 1995 at the age of 45 years old, and boxed on for another few years, winning the WBF heavyweight title at the age of 48 with a win over Bone Crusher Smith. That is a lesser regarded version of the world title, but to be knocking about at any level of boxing in your late 40s is impressive. So Joe Bugner was a 2-time heavyweight champion of Great Britain who took on everyone throughout his boxing career. But he was disrespected by the British press for the most part of his career. He could not get out of the shadow of Henry Cooper. The British public would not let that go. And when it comes to the boxing cartel or syndicate, who some fans theorise may have played a hand in him getting the nod over Henry Cooper on that fateful night, weren't exactly good to Bugner. Bugner left the boxing syndicate during his career as he wasn't getting his fair share of the revenue generated from his fights. That's how the syndicate would tend to treat fighters. Joe Bugner was heavily scrutinised for his attitude outside of the ring and for his low-risk style in the ring, which was labelled boring. But this pile-on was definitely motivated by the hate for him that was manifested when he beat Cooper in '71. Henry Cooper was stopped by Muhammad Ali twice, and Joe Bugner made it the distance with Ali twice. But the perception was that Cooper displayed more heart in his losing efforts, and that Bugner had 2 boring and cowardice performances against the great Muhammad Ali. And that perceived distinction between both of Cooper's fights and both of Bugner's fights with Ali is quite debatable in parts. And as for the boring style of Joe Bugner's, well, that could be attributed to the fact that in 1969, when he was only 18 years old, Joe Bugner defeated a man called Ulrich Regis on points in an 8-rounder, and Ulrich Regis died of brain injuries 4 days after his loss to Bugner. Bugner went on to put on passive displays of boxing at times throughout his career and was dubbed the Harmless Hercules. But was his in-ring passivity all because of that fateful Ulrich Regis fight in 1969? Well, it may very well have been. Now to get back on track with the British heavyweight title timeline after that mini documentary of sorts about Joe Bugner, there would be no British heavyweight title fight for over 2 years after Bugner became a 2-time champ with his brutal KO victory over Richard Dunn on October 12, 1976. On October 24, 1978, Hackney's John L. Gardner would be taking on former European title challenger Billy Aird for the vacant British and Commonwealth heavyweight titles at the Royal Albert Hall. John L. Gardner TKO'd Billy Aird in the 5th round to become the new champion. After a couple of non-title fight victories, Gardner would be making his first British and Commonwealth heavyweight title defence at the Empire Pool in Wembley on June 26, 1979. And Gardner would be defending the titles against a very interesting challenger by the name of Paul Sykes, a notorious UK prison hardman from Wakefield who had a fairly brief professional boxing career between prison stretches. The hardened prisoner would prove no match for the champion, as in a fight fought at a great pace, Gardner would weather the early storm from Paul Sykes and would begin to overwhelm a tiring Sykes as the action went on, until Sykes ultimately turned away and quit in the 6th round. A thrilling defence of the Lonsdale belt from John L. Gardner there. Now, I must say, Paul Sykes might be the most unique British heavyweight title challenger of all time. He did box as a boy, but he was in and out of jail from the age of 17 and spent many years in the prison system for a myriad of violent crimes, and he was known to be an offender within the confines of multiple prisons in northern England. Between a release from prison in 1977 and a 5-year sentencing in 1981, Sykes managed to have a 10-fight professional boxing career from February 1978 until March of 1980, challenging for the Central Area heavyweight title in just his 2nd pro fight and losing by disqualification, and challenging John L. Gardner for the British heavyweight title in his penultimate fight. Paul Sykes is not the only British heavyweight title challenger there had been to that point who had a very storied life outside of the ring. One Freddie Mills challenged for the vacant British heavyweight title back in 1944 against Jack London, if you'll remember, and he was actually a light heavyweight champion of Great Britain and of the world. Freddie Mills was a restaurant and nightclub owner after his boxing days, and in 1965 he was found dead in his car, having been shot in the eye. And there are insane conspiracy theories surrounding Freddie Mills' death, some of which would make him the boxer with one of the most layered life stories ever, if true. But with the footage we have available of the man in question, and the plethora of prison stories there are about the guy, I'd say Paul Sykes is the most bizarre and unique character to have ever challenged for the British heavyweight title. Now it turns out that Paul Sykes would be John L. Gardner's only British and Commonwealth heavyweight title defence. Gardner vacated those titles without defending them again, but he would manage to pick up the European heavyweight title in 1980 and make one defence of that title. Now John L. Gardner certainly isn't devoid of a crime-related story to tell himself, as years after retiring from boxing, the Londoner went on to manage one of Tyneside's toughest pubs, the Three Tons in Gateshead, and while working there, Gardner was stabbed 14 times with a butcher's knife by a Gateshead gangster, an attack which left Gardner's guts hanging out. Luckily, Gardner and his wife fought off the attacker, and Gardner would survive the attack. Back to that precious British heavyweight title that Gardner left vacant after his win over Paul Sykes in '79, it would next be contested for on March 30th, 1981, as Billy Aird would be having another crack at the vacant title, this time against a man who'd already beaten him, Northern Irishman Gordon Ferris. In this rematch, Ferris would outpoint Aird over the 15 rounds to become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. On October 12, 1981, the Jamaican-born Welshman Neville Meade, a man who had lost to Paul Sykes back in '78, would be challenging for Gordon Ferris' Lonsdale belt. Neville Meade knocked Gordon Ferris out in the first round to become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. Meade held the title for nearly 2 years without defending it. He would first defend the Lonsdale belt against fellow Welshman David Bomber Pearce in Cardiff on November 22, 1983. Meade knocked Pearce out in the second round to defend his Welsh heavyweight title back in January 1980, and in this rematch, the Welsh heavyweight title would also be on the line as well as the British. David Pearce would stop Meade in the 9th round to avenge the loss and become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain and of Wales. Meade vs Pearce 2 wound up being the last ever British heavyweight title fight scheduled for 15 rounds. David Bomber Pearce would not make a defence of the British heavyweight title, and in Pearce's case, this was due to very unfortunate circumstances. He won a non-title fight down at cruiserweight in January 1984, and then he would challenge for the European heavyweight title in April. Ahead of his European title fight, a routine brain scan showed abnormalities which put his boxing career into question, but the British Boxing Board of Control would let Pearce go ahead with his European title fight against Lucian Rodriguez. Pearce had an injured hand going into this European title fight, by the way, and he would manage to drop the champion twice in the 8th round, but after the 12 rounds, the compromised Pearce lost a unanimous decision, and that loss to Rodriguez in the Euro title fight wound up being David Pearce's last fight that the British Boxing Board of Control would sanction, as a review of his brain scan that concluded after that fight ultimately prompted the board to ban his boxing licence, and he therefore had to give back the Lonsdale belt. The beloved fighter from Newport's career was over at the age of 25, and he campaigned to get his British Boxing Board of Control licence back for years to no avail. David Bomber Pearce tragically passed away in 2000 at the young age of 41 due to sudden adult death syndrome. Pearce will forever be treasured as a Welsh boxing legend. There is a statue of him holding the Lonsdale belt in memory of him in his hometown of Newport, and he is remembered endearingly as Newport Rocky. September 18th, 1985 would be the date of the next British heavyweight title fight after David Bomber Pearce was forced into retirement. Nigerian-born Fonzo Banjo defeated Hughroy Currie on points in a 10-rounder for the vacant Southern Area heavyweight title back in May of '84, and in September of '85 they'd be rematching with the Southern Area title and the vacant British title on the line. So this was the second British heavyweight title fight in a row that was also for an area belt. Hughroy Currie won a 12-round points decision over Banjo in the rematch to become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. Hughroy Currie had been knocked out by the previous holder of his new title, David Pearce, back in the amateurs, and Currie expressed his relief in not having to face Pearce again in the pros for the British title. On April 12, 1986, Hughroy Currie would be making his first defence of that Lonsdale belt against the undefeated Horace Notice. The vacant Commonwealth title was on the line here too. Trevor Berbick won the Commonwealth title left vacant by John L. Gardner in 1981. And after 3 Commonwealth title defences, Trevor Berbick was stripped of the Commonwealth title when he became a champion of the world. And that's how the title was being reunified with the British title here in 1986. Hughroy Currie would drop Horace Notice in the 6th round in this title fight, and Notice got back up and immediately dropped Currie back, and Currie got up. And then Horace Notice pursued Hughroy Currie with a relentless onslaught to gain the 6th round TKO victory and become the new British and Commonwealth heavyweight champ in just his 10th pro fight. After a non-title fight victory and lone Commonwealth title defence, Notice first defended his Lonsdale belt with a 5th round stoppage victory over David Gearside in March of 1987. Horace Notice would next be defending his British and Commonwealth heavyweight titles against Paul Lister on November 3rd up in Tyne and Wear County, Lister's hometown. Horace Notice stopped Lister in the 3rd round to retain his titles. And seeing as this was Horace Notice's 3rd British title fight victory, the 2nd defence after winning the belt, Horace Notice won the Lonsdale belt outright, becoming the first heavyweight to win a Lonsdale belt outright since Henry Cooper won his 3rd belt outright 20 years prior, in 1967. Horace Notice then made a lone Commonwealth title defence later in the month when he stopped the Australian Dean Waters in the 4th round. Then in September 1988, Horace Notice defended his British title at the York Hall against the man he won the title from in a rematch, Hughroy Currie. Notice stopped Currie in the 10th round this time around to remain British and Commonwealth heavyweight champ. The rematch with Currie would be Notice's last ever fight. Notice was forced to retire due to 2 detached retinas. He had been suffering with left eye problems for a while, but when he went to the doctors, he came to learn that he had detached retinas in both eyes. Horace Notice retired with an undefeated record of 16-0, and he was an outright Lonsdale belt winner with 3 British heavyweight title defences, 5 Commonwealth heavyweight title defences, and all 6 of his title fight victories came by way of stoppage. Horace Notice may be the biggest what if in heavyweight boxing history out of any British heavyweight champion in history. Or will there be an even bigger what if to come in this British heavyweight title timeline? Now, I wouldn't exactly call David Bomber Pearce a what if in heavyweight boxing, because he was on the cusp of pursuing world honours at cruiserweight before his career unfortunately came to an untimely end. The Commonwealth title left vacant by Notice found its way to Britain's Derek Williams in November of 1988, and on January 18, 1989, the British heavyweight title that Notice left vacant would be contested for at the Royal Albert Hall in a bout between the former champion Hughroy Currie and the knockout machine Gary Mason. Gary Mason was 28-0 with 27 KOs at the time and was coming off of a stoppage victory over James Quick Tillis, and Mason had stopped multiple other former Mike Tyson opponents. Hughroy Currie would not manage to regain the title in this vacant title fight, as the menacing Gary Mason would knock him out in the 4th round to become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. Gary Mason made his first British title defence in June when he brutally knocked out Jess Hardin in the 2nd round at the Brentwood Centre. The night before Gary Mason's first British title defence, a kid called Lennox Lewis made his pro debut at the Royal Albert Hall. Mason followed his first British title defence up with a big non-title fight victory when he knocked out Tyrell Biggs in October, and then he gained a lesser non-title fight victory in December, defeating Mark Wills on points in a 10-rounder. So Gary Mason is the man who started the 1990s as the heavyweight champion of Great Britain, having made 1 defence of the title, but he did not make a British title defence in the year 1990. He started off the year with a 10-round points victory in a non-title fight against the American Everett Martin in March. Unfortunately, Gary Mason suffered a detached retina as a result of the Everett Martin fight and he required surgery. The British heavyweight title must be cursed, eh? Gary Mason literally won the title that was left vacant by a man who was forced to retire due to 2 detached retinas. The injury put Gary Mason's career into question, but he signed with Mickey Duff allegedly off the back of an ultimatum that Duff gave him, and Mickey Duff then helped Gary Mason to get clearance to box.
I will do everything to help you to get your license back if you come with me. If you go against me, I will do everything within my power to stop you from getting your license back.
And Mason would be back in the ring in December, taking on another American contender in the form of James Pritchard in another non-title fight. Gary Mason got the rounds in against the much smaller heavyweight in this comeback fight after his eye surgery, and he cruised to a 9th round TKO victory in a fight in which his eye injury caused him no bother. Gary Mason kept a hold of the Lonsdale belt throughout the injury-induced inactivity and the non-title bouts, and the newly crowned heavyweight champion of Europe, Lennox Lewis, had his sights set on Mason's British title. So that takes us to the British and European heavyweight title unification between Gary Mason and Lennox Lewis in Wembley Arena on March 6 of 1991. Both men were undefeated, Mason with a record of 35 wins with 32 KOs, and Lewis was 14-0 with 12 KOs. There would definitely be world title opportunities for the winner here, and the bookies actually had Gary Mason as the favourite over Lennox Lewis in this title bout, and Mason did boast a much higher world ranking than Lewis.
When I get really mad, I just look at this picture and see a smile on Mason's face, holding up the belt. Well, I'm going to wipe that smile off his face and take away that belt, because that belt's mine.
Lennox Lewis was doing the better boxing early in the fight, but Gary Mason would have some success with explosive attacks in the second and third round. But in that third round, as Mason was going for the big swings, Lewis was just jabbing him at will, to the point where Mason's right eye was pretty much fully swelled shut before the third round came to an end. Lennox Lewis had a very quiet fourth round. He let Mason swing away in desperation and had the half-blinded man where he wanted. Mason was still looking pretty dangerous in the fifth, and Lennox Lewis was kind of looking too tired to keep up a good pace, but Mason's work wasn't really bothering Lennox, and Lennox probably didn't feel too urgent to push the action against the one-eyed man. He'd done the damage in that third round. In round 6, Lennox Lewis would be putting a beating on the weathered-looking Gary Mason. He'd done a fair bit of damage at this point, but Mason would still gallantly come out for the 7th round. Lewis tried to get rid of Mason at the start of the 7th, but Mason wasn't having it, and he livened up the crowd with a spirited onslaught on Lewis. But the referee took a look at the diabolical level of damage that had been done to Gary Mason's right eye, and this ultimately urged the referee to wave off the fight. By way of a 7th round TKO victory, Lennox Lewis was the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. Lennox Lewis may very well have been too good for Gary Mason anyway, but he was undoubtedly too good for a Gary Mason with a detached retina. The injury to the right eye had completely derailed Gary Mason's career. Gary Mason was a heavyweight who was set for world level opportunities. He was ready to mix it in with the Mike Tysons and the George Foremans and the Evander Holyfields and Razor Ruddocks of the world. But in his first top level fight since the eye surgery, an insurmountable amount of damage had been done to that right eye, and this scrapped all of Mason's plans to contend for world titles. The last British heavyweight champion before Gary Mason was Horace Notice, who was forced to retire as an undefeated champion due to his two detached retinas. Mason did take a loss and lose his belt before he retired, but that's because he fought on after suffering the detached retina. So Horace Notice was quite a big what if in heavyweight boxing, but given that Gary Mason had a much better resume than Horace Notice before his career was ended, Gary Mason does take the cake as the biggest what if out of any British heavyweight champion in history. Granted, the heavyweight division was absolutely stacked in the 90s, and Gary Mason would have probably ended up having a similar presence on the world stage to an Alex Stewart or something, but in a decade in which Bruce Seldon was a WBA World Heavyweight Champion, Axel Schultz and Francois Botha were having a vacant IBF World Heavyweight title fight, guys in their mid-40s were challenging for the undisputed and unified World Heavyweight titles, and then you had the whole WBO World Heavyweight title scene in which the UK had a lot of involvement in. There's no telling what Gary Mason's ceiling would have been. 3 out of the last 4 heavyweight champions had their careers ended due to really unfortunate circumstances. That being Gary Mason, Horace Notice and David Pearce. Let's hope this Lennox Lewis kid can break the curse. After a non-title fight victory over former world heavyweight champion Mike Weaver over in the States, Lennox Lewis would be back to Blighty defending his British and European heavyweight titles for the first time against former cruiserweight champion of Great Britain and of the world Glenn McCrory at the Royal Albert Hall on September 30th, 1991. Lewis vs McCrory took place a mere 9 days after the tragic Michael Watson incident, which shocked the nation and caused members of the media and parliament in the UK to call for the sport of boxing to be banned completely. But this British heavyweight title fight of course still went ahead. Lennox Lewis dropped Glenn McCrory twice in the second round for the stoppage victory, and he remained the heavyweight champion of Great Britain and Europe. After 2 non-title fight victories in the US, Lennox Lewis would be attempting to unify his British and European heavyweight titles with Derek Williams' Commonwealth heavyweight title at the Royal Albert Hall on April 30th, 1992. In a heated battle full of bravado, mainly from Derek Williams' part, Lewis would stop his fellow Londoner in the 3rd round to become the new heavyweight champion of the Commonwealth and to make his second defence of the British and Euro titles. This was Lennox Lewis's 3rd British title fight victory, meaning that he had won the glorious Lonsdale belt outright. Now after a non-title win over in the States in August, Lennox Lewis would be taking on the number 1 ranked WBC heavyweight contender Donovan Razor Ruddock in a WBC world title eliminator at the Earl's Court on October 31st, 1992. The winner of this fight would be the mandatory for the winner of the undisputed heavyweight title fight between Evander Holyfield and Riddick Bowe the next month. Lewis's Commonwealth title was on the line here in this fight with Canada's Razor Ruddock as well. In this fight, Lennox Lewis would drop Razor Ruddock hard right at the end of the 1st round, and then in the 2nd round, Lewis would rush Ruddock and drop him 2 more times to ultimately gain the finish. Lewis had become the number 1 contender for the world heavyweight title with this emphatic 2nd round stoppage victory in front of the London crowd. Now, Riddick Bowe would win the undisputed heavyweight title from Evander Holyfield with a unanimous decision victory 2 weeks later. So Lewis was mandatory for Bowe's WBC title, meaning that Bowe had to fight Lewis to keep that version of his world heavyweight title. Unfortunately, a month after beating Holyfield, Riddick Bowe chose to give up his WBC title and not fight Lennox Lewis, so we didn't get to see Lennox Lewis versus Riddick Bowe. But what that did mean is that Lennox Lewis was awarded the WBC World Heavyweight title, as he was the mandatory and the champion would not fight him. So Lennox Lewis had become the first Brit to become the heavyweight champion of the world in over 95 years, since Bob Fitzsimmons won the World Heavyweight title from James J. Corbett in March 1897. Of course, Bob Fitzsimmons was a world champion years before the British boxing authorities began naming champions of Britain. So Lennox Lewis is the first ever British heavyweight champion who went on to win the world heavyweight title. He made history to a major extent here. None of the 32 different heavyweight champions of Great Britain before him achieved the greatest honour in world sport and became the heavyweight champion of the world. British heavyweight boxing was in a much better place than it was in previous decades at the point of Lewis becoming the WBC world champ. It is rather anticlimactic that Lewis didn't get the opportunity to win his first world title in the ring, but Lewis went on to win a total of 15 world heavyweight title fights throughout his career, so he certainly was a legit world champion. British heavyweight champions definitely had a way better status at world level at this point in 1992 than they did when we looked at the performance of every British heavyweight champion from 1958 and before at European and world level. Seen as Lennox Lewis was crowned heavyweight champion of the world in December of 1992, his British heavyweight title was therefore declared vacant. The British heavyweight title would next be contested for in a vacant title fight between the Nigerian-born Herbie Hyde and the former Central Area heavyweight champion Michael Murray on February 27, 1993 in Dagenham. Herbie Hyde stopped Michael Murray in the 5th round to become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. Now, Herbie Hyde would never defend his British heavyweight title. The British champion who came before Herbie Hyde and Lennox Lewis relinquished the British title when he won a world title, and Herbie Hyde would sort of follow in Lewis's footsteps, as on the 19th of March 1994, Herbie Hyde won the WBO version of the world heavyweight title from the British-born American Michael Bent. But now, of course, the WBO world title would not be universally recognised until the mid-2000s. So after the WBO World Heavyweight Champion Herbie Hyde left the British Heavyweight title vacant, the next British Heavyweight title fight would be a vacant title fight between the 6'9" Nigerian-born James Oyebola and the undefeated Clifton Mitchell in Cardiff on November 19, 1994. Oyebola would knock Clifton Mitchell clean out to become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. That's the second Nigerian-born British heavyweight champion we've had in a row. James Oyebola's first defence of the British title would be against Scott Welch on October 27, 1995 in Brighton. Oyebola had knocked Scott Welch out back in May 1994, so this was a rematch. As well as Oyebola's British title, the vacant Commonwealth heavyweight title was on the line in this rematch too, the title that was left vacant by one Henry Akinwande. Scott Welch would stop James Oyebola with a body shot in the 10th round of this rematch to become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain and the Commonwealth. Scott Welch never defended his British title nor his Commonwealth title, and both titles were left vacant. The next Commonwealth heavyweight title fight after Welch vs Oyebola 2 was fought between the Brit Julius Francis and the Zambian Joseph Chingangu in June of 1997. Julius Francis won a 12-round decision to claim the vacant Commonwealth heavyweight title. The next British heavyweight title fight was on September 27, 1997, as the newly crowned Commonwealth champ Julius Francis would be taking on Gary Delaney in a vacant British heavyweight title fight at the Ulster Hall in Belfast. Julius Francis stopped Delaney in the 6th round to become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. After back-to-back losses in Germany to Axel Schultz and Vitaly Klitschko, Julius Francis made his first British title defence against undefeated Ingle Gym fighter Pele Reid at the York Hall on January 30, 1999. Pele Reid was a former world champion kickboxer who had knocked out Vitaly Klitschko in that particular discipline. The dynamic prospect Pele Reid was the favourite here, but Francis pulled off the upset and TKO'd Reid in the 3rd round to remain champ. Julius Francis stepped in as an underdog again for his next British and Commonwealth title defence, as he was defending his titles against the then undefeated Danny Williams at the Royal Albert Hall on April 3, 1999. In an entertaining 12-round back-and-forth battle between these two former sparring partners, the champion Julius Francis was the much busier of the two and would outwork the young Danny Williams and widen the gap as the fight went on. And after the 12, the referee awarded the fight to Julius Francis on points. Julius Francis pulled off the upset against an undefeated opponent again and remained the heavyweight champion of Great Britain. and being that this was his second British title defence, his third British title fight victory, Julius Francis won the Lonsdale belt outright. That pristine belt was all his. 1999 is the year that the criteria was changed for winning the Lonsdale belt. The rule was changed to where you had to win 4 total British title fights or make 3 defences after winning it to keep the belt outright. So Julius Francis was the last ever heavyweight to win a Lonsdale belt outright after just 3 British title fight victories. Julius Francis' next British and Commonwealth title defence was a rematch, as on June 26, 1999, on the undercard of Vitaly Klitschko vs Herbie Hyde in Millwall, Julius Francis would be taking on former British heavyweight champ Scott Welch. Back in 1995, the fight before Scott Welch won the British title from James Oyebola, he stopped Julius Francis in the 10th round after scoring 5 knockdowns to claim Francis' Southern Area heavyweight title. In the 1999 rematch with the British title on the line, the champion Julius Francis would avenge the loss with a 12 rounds points victory to remain the champ. That was British title defence number 3 for Francis. So despite being the last Lonsdale belt outright winner at heavyweight with the old rules, he would have won the belt outright with the new rules anyway. Scott Welch retired after the loss to Julius Francis, and he went on to play the role of bare-knuckle boxer Goodnight Anderson in the famous Guy Ritchie movie Snatch, which was released in 2000. Scott Welch's character faced off against Brad Pitt's character Mikey O'Neill in the climactic fight of the film. After his third successful British heavyweight title defence against Scott Welch, Julius Francis would not be making another defence of his British and Commonwealth titles. Instead, he'd be welcoming an American former world heavyweight champion over to the UK for his UK debut. And that American former world heavyweight champ was none other than Mike Tyson. A Mike Tyson who was on the comeback trail since his second loss to Evander Holyfield and his subsequent ban from boxing. Mike Tyson vs Julius Francis was taking place on the 29th of January 2000 at the Manchester Arena. Francis gave up his Commonwealth title to take the Tyson fight, and the man who Julius Francis successfully defended his British title against in Danny Williams picked up the vacant Commonwealth title in December 1999. Now in this non-title bout and big UK debut of Mike Tyson, the heavyweight champion of Great Britain predictably proved no match for Tyson, as Tyson dropped Francis 5 times and stopped him in the second round. Francis of course remained British champ after losing to Tyson, and there's not much shame in losing to Mike Tyson, eh? Francis was having a great British title reign. He defended his belt in 2 upset wins over undefeated guys and against a former British champ and former conqueror of himself. And a month and a half after losing to Tyson, on March 13th 2000, Julius Francis put his British title on the line at York Hall against a man with a record of 7-4 who he'd already beaten back in 1996, Mike Holden. Mike Tyson had just obliterated Julius Francis, but surely Mike Holden would not be able to dethrone Julius Francis off his British title, not with the run Francis was on in the domestic scene. In this fight that took place a mere 6 weeks after the big Tyson payday, Julius Francis did look rather lackluster, and in a closely contested affair, Mike Holden was able to just outwork and out-tough Francis to pull off the upset and have his hand raised in victory after the 12 rounds. So yes, Mike Holden was the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. He had won that precious Lonsdale belt on his 32nd birthday. Now on the undercard of Mike Holden's British heavyweight title winning victory over Julius Francis at the York Hall, a man called Mark Potter won the Southern Area heavyweight title. Now, Mike Holden was scheduled to make his first defence of the British heavyweight title on October 21st 2000 against the Commonwealth heavyweight champion Danny Williams at the Wembley Conference. But Mike Holden had to pull out of his fight with Danny Williams a week before the fight as he came down with the flu. However, Danny Williams' shot at the British title on October 21st in Wembley remained, as Mike Holden was stripped of the title for not being able to defend it, and the Southern Area heavyweight champ Mark Potter stepped in on a week's notice to fight the Commonwealth champ Danny Williams in a vacant British heavyweight title fight. So Mike Holden was forced to give up that Lonsdale belt before he had a chance to make a single title defence. Mark Potter rushed Danny Williams right out of the gate in this vacant title fight, and was actually robbed of a knockdown about 7 seconds into the fight, as he dropped Williams with a hard right hand, but it was mistakenly ruled a slip by the referee. Potter would stick it on Williams throughout this opening round. Williams tried to meet fire with fire, but Potter was overwhelming him. Now in the very start of the second round, Williams was actually gifted a knockdown after he caught Potter on the back of the shoulder and knocked him off balance. Potter unfairly conceded a point deficit here. Not long after that, Williams went south of the border with a punch and Potter was given time to recover, but Williams was not penalised. But then after what was actually a clean left hook to the body from Williams, the ref then decided to deduct a point from Williams. The ref's a bit all over the place here. As the action resumed, it remained to be a heated back and forth battle in there. Wild stuff kept happening at the start of the round in this affair, as right at the start of the third, Danny Williams made connection with an overhand right that was partially intercepted by Potter's left arm, and this caused Williams' right shoulder to just go. Williams looked down at his shoulder in despair as he realised he'd just lost mobility in it. Danny Williams' right arm was just dangling by his side and he looked in trouble. He couldn't throw any punches or defend himself with the right hand, and as much as he tried to work off of the lead hand and make up for it with that, he looked heavily compromised. He was looking like he was going to fall short in his second attempt at the British heavyweight title here. Jim Watt on commentary seemed to think that it was time for Williams to pull out of this fight here in the third round.
This is a show of courage which probably he could do without, because if he gets knocked out here, no one will listen to excuses later. He's unfit to box. If that shoulder is gone, he's unfit to box. He should walk to the side. He should walk to the side here and just declare it's all over. Nobody would hold anything against him. I wonder if he's hoping maybe it's like a muscular spasm type thing which is going to clear, but that doesn't look like that to me.
Well, he hasn't thrown one punch with the right hand, and look, when he goes back to his corner, what are they going to do? The doctor's in there, having a look at the board, and he's complaining to Jim McDonnell, obviously in pain. Well, Julius Francis, sitting next to me, says he can't go on with this sort of injury. What do you think, Jim?
If he's not right, he has to get out of there.
That was the shot.
Yep, that's knocked out. I think that the punch was partially blocked. Probably his arm landed on Potter's elbow and just wrenched the shoulder. Yep, that's what's happened.
Now going into the fourth round, it seemed to appear that Williams had gained mobility back in that right shoulder between rounds. Potter was still outdogging Williams in that fourth round though, and Williams was certainly still compromised and still couldn't make full use of that right hand. With his left hand now, Danny Williams went low again, and this time he was deducted 2 points at once. In the fifth round, Mark Potter would continue to beat up the compromised Danny Williams. Williams was fighting back, but Potter was most certainly getting the better of the action. But all that beating up on Williams was tiring Potter out. Now in the sixth round, Williams again threw a right hand that was intercepted by Potter's left as Potter was also throwing, and Williams' shoulder went fully out of the socket again. So Williams looked done for now. It was desperation time for him in that sixth round.
It's completely gone, the shoulder. I don't know whether he's looking at the corner. Jim McDonnell is surely going to have to put him out.
To get him out.
He cannot fight on now, Danny Williams.
This is too early in the round, Adam. He wants to get himself out of there. Surely his corner have realised this. Look at his arm.
Well, I don't know what pain he must be going through in there, Danny Williams. But he hasn't even got a guard with that right hand. What's keeping him in this?
Adam, there's a difference between retiring with a bad arm and being knocked out, and he's going to get knocked out if he hasn't got a defence against these punches.
Absolutely. Look how far out the shoulder blade has come. For the second time, it's come loose in the fight. He tries.
Surely his corner are clapping their hands to get back into the fight. They've obviously not noticed the arm.
He's in a no-win situation, and he will not give up.
He's got no defence, obviously, against the left hook.
And still they clap in the corner.
Yep, they're clapping him forward.
Oh, he's got it! That's unbelievable from Williams, and Potter is out. I don't know whether he's going to make it. That is astonishing. He's up, just about. In goes Williams, fighting with one arm. He's hit Potter again. The referee stopped him. He's come in. He's down for the second time. The count's at 5. Potter's got nothing left. What a turnaround. He can hardly warm up Potter. And Williams has him down again. It's over. It's over. Unbelievable stuff here at Wembley. Danny Williams fighting on instinct and bravery with one arm has won the British heavyweight title at the second attempt and retained his Commonwealth belt in one of the most bizarre fights I have ever seen.
Adam, if you saw this in a Rocky movie, you would say they have gone over the top. This was unbelievable.
Danny Williams had done it. With his one working arm, Williams dropped Mark Potter and stopped him to become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. This was a true underdog come from behind moment. Potter was the one coming in with the disadvantage as he came in on short notice, but with how compromised Williams was in that ring, Mark Potter was most certainly an extremely heavy favourite to win in play. But Williams weren't having it. He wanted that British heavyweight championship. Danny Williams was in way too much agony to even celebrate his British title winning victory. It certainly did his shoulder no good to fight on in this state, so after all that, he really does have to ask himself if it was all worth it. Course it fucking was. With one arm, he'd won the precious Lonsdale belt held by greats like Lennox Lewis and Henry Cooper. Oh, and Williams had retained the Commonwealth title with this win over Potter and all. After getting surgery on his right shoulder and taking some time off, Danny Williams was back in the ring in June of 2001 at the York Hall. He successfully defended his Commonwealth title against the Australian heavyweight champion Cali Meehan when he knocked him out in 32 seconds. This lone Commonwealth title defence lined up Danny Williams' first British title defence, which was a rematch with former champion Julius Francis on July 28th at the Wembley Conference Centre. Of course, Francis got the win over Williams in the first fight in 1999 and retained his British and Commonwealth titles. And in this rematch, Danny Williams was defending what was now his British and Commonwealth titles, so the roles were reversed here. After losing his British title to Mike Holden, Julius Francis took a year out of the ring. Then he beat Mike Holden in a rubber match, which set up his British title shot against Danny Williams. In this title fight rematch, Danny Williams made really good use of that left jab and was able to fairly comfortably defend all of Julius Francis' power shots. Williams was looking the better boxer in there this time around. And in the fourth round, Williams landed one of those old left hook come uppercuts straight to the eye of Julius Francis, and Julius Francis went down in agony and was out for the count. Danny Williams was the winner by stoppage. He had avenged his only professional loss at the time, meaning he had beaten every man he'd faced at that point, and he was still the heavyweight champion of Great Britain and the Commonwealth. Was Danny Williams due a nice little British title run like the one Julius Francis himself was having when he beat him in 1999? Danny Williams' next fight after his first British title defence was a non-title fight over in the States in December. He stopped a journeyman in 2 rounds on the undercard of Evander Holyfield vs John Ruiz 3. Would there be bigger nights to come in the USA for Williams? Now, Williams' next defence of his British and Commonwealth titles was set for February 12, 2002 at the York Hall in Bethnal Green, airing on the BBC. Williams was meant to fight Keith Long, but Long had to pull out of the fight due to injury. This fight was set to be the first British heavyweight title fight aired on the BBC in a long time, so the BBC and the promoters were scrambling to find an opponent for Danny Williams on that date. With a few fighters declining the offer, it was one Michael Sprott, who happened to be on a holiday in Barbados when he got the call, who took the offer to challenge Danny Williams on less than a week's notice. Michael Sprott had lost 3 of his last 5 fights coming into this British title fight, getting stopped in 2 of those 3 losses, so he wasn't the most formidable challenger on paper. Ahead of this return to British heavyweight title action on the BBC, Danny Williams had this to say.
I want to get back to the days of Henry Cooper, when you could ask the average man on the street who's the British champion, and they would know.
The underdog Michael Sprott started out hot in this fight, seemingly to try and catch the champion off guard, but it wouldn't take long for him to slow down on that relentless approach. The fight was somewhat competitive as it went on, but Danny Williams was doing the harder and much more accurate punching, scoring a knockdown on Sprott in the 4th round. Williams continued to beat up a wavering Michael Sprott, and Sprott's corner threw the towel in the 7th round to save their man from taking any more punishment in this late notice fight. Danny Williams was the winner by stoppage and had made defence number 2 of his British heavyweight title, and defence number 4 of the Commonwealth title. Danny Williams would be defending his British and Commonwealth titles in the York Hall again on September 17th against Keith Long, the man who Williams was originally meant to face on that February 12th date. Danny Williams beat Keith Long on points to retain his British heavyweight title and win the Lonsdale belt outright. Danny Williams became the first heavyweight to win the Lonsdale belt outright in the new era of the British title. Since the British Boxing Board of Control made the criteria to win a Lonsdale belt outright more demanding with the requirement of an extra title fight victory. Danny Williams was then off to Germany to challenge for Sinan Samil Sam's European heavyweight title in February 2003. Williams was the favourite to win the Euro title, but he fell short as he got dropped 3 times and was stopped in the 6th round. A disappointing result for the heavyweight champion of Great Britain there. In April, Danny Williams made a successful defence of his Commonwealth title when he stopped heavyweight champion of Australia Bob Mirovic in the 4th round. And then on September 26, 2003, Danny Williams would be making British title defence number 4 in a rematch with Michael Sprott, in Michael Sprott's hometown, Reading. Michael Sprott went on an 8-fight winning streak since his loss to Williams a year before, including wins over former British title challenger Pele Reid, former British champion himself Mike Holden, and Sprott won the vacant Southern Area heavyweight title against former Southern Area champ and British title challenger Mark Potter, and Sprott even made a defence of his Southern Area title. And now that Michael Sprott had full preparation for this title shot against Williams, and with how Williams got battered in that European title fight earlier in the year, Sprott definitely had way more of a chance of beating Williams this time around than he did in fight 1. The Reading crowd were really urging on Sprott in this rematch, and he was looking lively in there, putting it on Williams from the first round. The hometown lad was looking game, and the momentum was certainly on his side. The pace did drop a bit in the third round, but Sprott had the champion's nose bloodied, and the Reading crowd were still lapping up every little shot that he made connection with. Sprott was still getting the better of the boxing in the fourth, but Williams landed a punch below the belt that Sprott was not happy with. And then right at the end of the round, Williams hit Michael Sprott low again and then dropped and hurt the challenger as he was reacting to the low blow. Williams put it on Michael Sprott early in the fifth as Sprott was still clearly hurt from the end of the fourth. Williams landed another shot in this flurry that Sprott indicated as low, and as Sprott was making that indication to the referee, Williams just knocked him out cold. You must defend yourself at all times in that ring. But was that a really dirty finish from Danny Williams? Referee Terry O'Connor didn't call a break before Williams landed the follow-up blows each time he dropped Sprott, and it is on the ref to call the low blows, not Michael Sprott. But let's just say this win did not sit right with the fans and the media, especially as this was a fight that Sprott was getting the better of before those low blows were landed later in the fourth round. Either way, that was Danny Williams' fourth successful defence of his British heavyweight title and seventh defence of his Commonwealth title. Due to the controversial nature of Williams' win, the British Boxing Board of Control ordered Danny Williams to defend his British title in a rematch with Michael Sprott, which of course was a trilogy bout as Sprott previously had 2 attempts at Williams' British heavyweight title. So Williams was making his 5th defence of his British title against a man he had defended it against twice already. Williams vs Sprott 3 was taking place on January 26th at the Wembley Conference Centre. In the third meeting between Danny Williams and Michael Sprott, which there is absolutely no footage of to be found online, the champion Danny Williams was trying to be cute in there, showboating while trying to box Sprott around. And despite not keeping up the greatest pace throughout the fight himself, Michael Sprott put on a sensible enough performance to edge the fight after 12 rounds as the referee scored the fight to him by 1 point. Michael Sprott was the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain and the Commonwealth, and he had got revenge on the man who held 2 wins over him. Danny Williams felt like he was robbed in this fight, so he lodged a complaint to the British Boxing Board of Control for them to order a rematch in his favour this time around, but the British Boxing Board of Control dismissed Williams' complaint, and promoter Frank Warren wasn't awfully enthusiastic about doing Williams vs Sprott 4. 3 months after winning the British and Commonwealth heavyweight titles, Michael Sprott was defending his belt in Reading against Matt Skelton. Matt Skelton was a former K1 kickboxer who turned to boxing in his 30s and was undefeated as a professional boxer at the point he was challenging for Michael Sprott's British title. Furthermore, Matt Skelton was actually the inaugural English heavyweight champion. The British Boxing Board of Control always issued area titles as the championship that was a level below the British title, but they introduced the English title in 2003, which is a level between area titles and the British title for English fighters. And Skelton won the inaugural title when he stopped former British champ Mike Holden. And going into the fight with Sprott, Skelton was coming off of an English title defence against former reigning British champ Julius Francis. Unfortunately, there is also no footage online of this 2004 British title fight between Sprott and Skelton, and this won't be the last of a lack of footage like this in the mid-2000s era of British heavyweight title fights. Mate, it ain't been this bad since we were looking at the 1940s fights. In a rough and tumble affair that went down to the wire, Matt Skelton knocked Michael Sprott out in the 12th and final round to become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain and the Commonwealth. In his next bout, Matt Skelton would be defending his Commonwealth title against Bob Mirovich at the York Hall in June. In a pretty wild scrap, Skelton dropped the Aussie twice and kept his title when Mirovich quit after the 4th round. Before we look up what was next for the heavyweight champion of Great Britain, Matt Skelton, it might be worth noting that on July 30th, 2004, former British heavyweight champion Danny Williams was taken on Iron Mike Tyson in Louisville, Kentucky. This was half a year after Williams lost his British and Commonwealth titles to Michael Sprott. Now, Mike Tyson was 38 years old at the time and had been inactive for nearly a year and a half since his win over Clifford Etienne. Tyson was very much expected to make light work of this former British champ who couldn't cut it at European level and was unheard of over in the States. Williams was a 9-1 underdog and was given no chance against the former 2-time heavyweight champion of the world.
Tyson, is he a legitimate top 10 guy right now?
Well, right now you can't rank him in the top 10 based on the inactivity, but after the Danny Williams fight, let's assume Tyson blows Williams away. I think an argument will exist for Tyson to perhaps take that 10 spot even off one relatively meaningless victory on July 30th.
Talk to us about his opponent, Danny Williams. How tough is he really? His only losses came against what some say were his only decent competition.
Danny Williams is one of the better fighters from Britain. Of course, that you can look at as a good thing or a bad thing because Britain, aside from maybe Lennox Lewis and a couple other guys in history, hasn't produced too many good heavyweights. The one thing you need to know about Danny Williams, though, is if Tyson does knock him down, and he's capable of doing that, he's got power in both fists. But Danny Williams, if he gets knocked down, he will get up. So the guy's got heart. And so, at the very least, people, if they decide to buy the pay-per-view, can expect an honest effort, in my opinion. Now, it may not last long, but he'll give an honest effort.
Has he beaten anyone of real substance, anyone that we would know?
The answer is no. He's never fought a legitimate top contender. If you follow boxing, you might have heard of Sinan Samal-Sam, who was the European champion, who has fought only one time. He had an HBO fight last year, but really the rest of his competition are guys that most Americans would never have heard of. But he's fought mostly the guys on the European and British level. And as long as it's not a guy like a Lennox Lewis in front of him, I think Tyson has a great chance to regain a title for what it's worth today in the splintered division.
Does Mike Tyson have a snowball's chance in hell of being the champion again anytime in the near future?
Well, he's going to knock this guy out in 2 or 3 rounds.
This guy, Danny Williams, his opponent coming up, says that Tyson's only 40% of what he used to be. Is that high or low?
Oh, it's about 30% too much for him. I mean, that's the bad news. I mean, there's good news and bad news about Danny Williams. You know, the good news is he did beat Julius Francis, this stiff heavyweight, the real softy from England. The bad news is he lost to him, too. And I don't think it's going to be just a morbid curiosity anymore. That's why they're putting a guy there that he can knock out, and they can start to sell it on what it used to be sold on, that he knocks guys out.
Mike Tyson looked his old self in this fight as he started out hot, much to the delight of the Louisville crowd. Tyson stunned Williams with a left hook and followed up with a big left uppercut halfway through the first round, which forced Williams to hold on for dear life. Williams recovered well, but Tyson was looking sharp with his vintage hooks to the body and uppercuts to the chin. Williams was standing his ground, but Tyson's work was a lot more telling here in the early going. Danny Williams was deducted 2 points in the third round for hitting on the break and for going low, and Tyson won the third round as well, so Williams was 5 points down after 3 rounds. Tyson appeared to have rocked Williams again early in the fourth round, and the American crowd were lively and enjoying this display from Tyson. This fourth round was very competitive as it went on, and later in the round, Williams sensed that Tyson was tiring, and starting with a couple of flush left uppercuts, he just stood and unloaded with a 20-odd punch combination. It was shades of Buster Douglas. Williams dropped Tyson, and Tyson was out for the count. Danny Williams, the recently turned former heavyweight champion of Great Britain, had pulled off the upset with a knockout victory over Mike Tyson that the Yanks never saw coming. Williams had brought some glory and restored some hope back in British heavyweight boxing on the world scene, after the then very recent retirement of the great Lennox Lewis. And say what you will about the 2004 version of Mike Tyson, but if you heard the way they were dismissing the Brit Danny Williams on the ESPN pre-fight programming, you'd know that this result was not expected at the time. They were questioning what Tyson could do against world champions and stuff at this point of his career, but they were saying, yeah, he's going to beat this British guy Danny Williams, but let's see what he can do against world champions after. So this was a big upset win, and Williams' win over Mike Tyson earned him a shot at Vitaly Klitschko's WBC heavyweight title in December of 2004. Williams couldn't bring that belt that belonged to Lennox Lewis a year before back to England, as he was topped by Vitaly Klitschko in a gallant yet very decisive losing effort. Back to the British heavyweight title, Matt Skelton would be making his first defence of the title against Keith Long on November 19th, 2004 at the York Hall. Keith Long fell short on his second attempt at the title, as Skelton dropped the tricky challenger with a right uppercut in the 11th round, and after Long made the count, Skelton followed up with a flurry to stop Long and keep his titles. Skelton gave up his Commonwealth title to take on the Argentinian heavyweight Fabio Moli in a fight for the vacant WBU World Heavyweight title in Wembley. Skelton beat the Argentinian up and stopped him in the 6th round to win that WBU title and improve his record to 16-0. So Matt Skelton was the undefeated heavyweight champion of the world. Now, of course, the WBU title is not a legit world title, and Skelton would vacate that WBU title not long after winning it to go back to defending his British title. Skelton was meant to defend his British title against former champ Danny Williams on July 16, 2005 in Bolton, but Williams pulled out last minute due to illness, so former English heavyweight champion Mark Krent stepped in to challenge Skelton on just a day's notice. Matt Skelton successfully retained his British title for the second time here as Mark Crence's corner pulled him out of the fight after the 7th round. On December 10th, 2005, Matt Skelton would be making his third defence of the British heavyweight title against former English title challenger John McDermott, a name a lot of people might recognise due to a controversial loss he would go on to suffer a few years after this point. Matt Skelton decked McDermott with a hard right hand 30 seconds into the fight, and then he dropped in twice more to stop the challenger halfway into the first round. Matt Skelton had made his third defence of the British heavyweight title, so he had won the precious Lonsdale belt outright. On the main event of that show, former British champ Danny Williams beat the undefeated Olympic gold medalist Audley Harrison by a split decision to win the vacant Commonwealth heavyweight title. Matt Skelton gave up his British title after the defence against McDermott, and Skelton took his first professional loss when he challenged for Danny Williams' Commonwealth title in February 2006 and lost a split decision after a war. The next British heavyweight title fight after Skelton vs McDermott was fought between the undefeated Welshman Scott Gammer and the former British title challenger and English champion Mark Crence on June 16, 2006 in Wales. This was a rematch from when Gammer stopped Crence in a British title eliminator back in May of 2005. And this time with the vacant British title on the line, Scott Gammer stopped Mark Crence again as he dropped him with a left hook in the 9th round, and then after Crence made the count, he followed up with a flurry that forced the referee to stop the fight. Scott Gammer was the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain, and the Welsh crowd were ecstatic. Scott Gammer became the first Welsh heavyweight to win that precious Lonsdale belt since the late great David Pearce won the title in 1983. Scott Gammer made a successful defence of his British title on October 13, 2006 when he beat Mickey Steed by a 12-round unanimous decision. On March 2, 2007, former champion Danny Williams would go to Wales to challenge for the undefeated Scott Gammer's British crown. Danny Williams was no longer Commonwealth champ at this point as he lost the title to Matt Skelton in a rematch, and Williams was coming off of a 3rd round stoppage defeat to Audley Harrison in that rematch going into his British title shot against Gammer. The unestablished champion Scott Gammer would have some decent early success on Danny Williams, outworking him quite a bit. Danny Williams' work rate was pretty low. He was very relaxed in there and was walking down Gammer with a low output, and on the sporadic occasion that Williams did push the action a bit, he certainly earned Gammer's respect. Williams lulled Gammer to fighting at his pace as the rounds went on, which allowed him to get the better of the exchanges, as Williams hurt Gammer for the first time in the fight at the end of the 7th round. Gammer was able to go back to boxing around the inactive Williams for the most part of round 8, landing some good shots, but he did not have the power to hurt Williams, and this was reinforced when Williams seemed relatively unshaken after taking 2 flush left hooks from Gammer at the round's end. In the 9th round, Danny Williams started to push the pace more, and he unloaded with a flurry and dropped Scott Gammer with a right hand, and the Welshman was out for the count. Just like that, Williams was the winner by KO, and the former outright Lonsdale belt winner had become a 2-time heavyweight champion of Great Britain. It would be well over a year into Danny Williams' second reign as the heavyweight champion of Great Britain that he'd be making his first title defence. He challenged for the IBF Intercontinental title in December 2007, and that fight ended in a no contest when his opponent Oleg Platov was cut due to an accidental head clash and could not continue. Williams then got a 6-round decision win over a journeyman in America in April 2008. Then in May, he stopped a German opponent over in Spain. On July 18, 2008, Danny Williams would be making his first defence in his second reign as British heavyweight champion against the English heavyweight champion John McDermott in Dagenham. Since getting stopped in the first round by Matt Skelton when he last challenged for the British title, McDermott went on a 6-fight win streak, including a points win over former British champ Scott Gammer in a British title eliminator, and a vacant English title fight victory in which he stopped Pele Reid in round 2. In his second shot at the British title, the challenger John McDermott would be competitive in there, boxing with the vastly more decorated domestic heavyweight Danny Williams. And quite early in the 5th stanza of the fight, McDermott would hurt the champion Williams badly. In pursuit of a finish, John McDermott was knocking Danny Williams all around that ring and snapping his head back with uppercuts. It's astonishing that Danny Williams survived this onslaught for over 2 minutes and stayed on his feet to see out that 5th round. McDermott hurt Williams a bit with an uppercut again in the 6th, but Danny Williams had the wherewithal to fight back more in this 6th round, and McDermott looked quite tired by the end of the round. That momentum McDermott had in the 5th was now gone. McDermott seemed weathered going into the second half of the fight, and Williams was getting the better of the action with this much slower pace. Danny Williams looked to be just ahead in the fight going into the 11th round, but in the 11th, Williams was deducted a point for punching below the belt. Then he was deducted another point for pushing McDermott's face on a break. That's 2 points off for the champ in the 11th. Williams would be landing the better punches in the 12th and final round as well, but he was deducted a 3rd point for letting his gum shield drop out of his mouth. That was the 4th time his gum shield fell out of his mouth in the fight. So with 3 points off from the champion in such a competitive fight, it was all up in the air after 12 rounds. In the end, the judges wound up giving the fight to Danny Williams on a majority decision. And with the 3-point deductions he was on the receiving end of, and even with the case for a McDermott 10-8 in the 5th round because of how out of it Williams was in that round, this was a controversial decision. The decision warranted an immediate rematch between the two, but the rematch only ended up being immediate on McDermott's part. The Williams vs McDermott British title fight rematch was set for November 8th in York Hall, but McDermott pulled out of the fight due to a rib injury. So the champion Danny Williams took on the 43-2 Polish heavyweight Albert Sosnowski on short notice on that date. The Pole ended up stopping Williams in the 8th round in this non-title affair, which actually derailed a scheduled fight with Francois Botha later in the month for Williams, but all that matters for the purpose of this particular documentary is that Williams was still the heavyweight champion of Great Britain after the loss to Sosnowski, and Williams vs McDermott 2 would finally take place on the 2nd of May 2009 in Sunderland. So would Danny Williams get a more decisive win to keep his title after the majority decision the first time out, or would McDermott avenge the loss and finally win that Lonsdale belt on his 3rd attempt? Well, in another closely contested affair that there wasn't much in, that definitely wasn't the cleanest again, that was rather lackluster, the fight went the 12-round distance, and the champion Danny Williams ended up winning a split decision to keep his title this time around. Danny Williams vs John McDermott 2 was quite the unsatisfactory rematch, and it ended up being the last British heavyweight title fight in the 2000s. After falling short in his 3rd shot at the British heavyweight title, John McDermott lost his English heavyweight title to a kid called Tyson Fury by way of a controversial referee decision. Referee Terry O'Connor, who was knocked out by John McDermott's father Stan McDermott back in the day, scored the fight 8 rounds to 2 in Tyson Fury's favour. And in October, Danny Williams entered the prizefighter tournament and lost a 3-round decision to Carl Baker in the 1st round. This was of course a non-title bout, so Danny Williams ended the decade as the heavyweight champion of Great Britain. The first British heavyweight title fight of the 2010s would take place at Upton Park on May 15, 2010, as the 2-time champion who now amassed a total of 6 title defences Danny Williams put his title on the line against a Zimbabwean-born kid fighting out of Finchley called Derek Chisora. Chisora was a replacement for the Commonwealth champion Sam Sexton here as the challenger for Williams' British title. Chisora already held a win over Sam Sexton as he beat him back in 2008, so he definitely was a valid replacement opponent in this British title fight. Derek Chisora put the pressure on early and he was able to hurt and drop the champion in the 2nd round. After Danny Williams made the count, Chisora dropped him again and the referee waved off the fight. Derek Chisora was the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. He was undefeated and he had won the Precious title in his 13th pro fight. Derek Chisora's first defence of the title came against the Commonwealth champion Sam Sexton, who was originally meant to fight Williams on the night that Chisora won the title off of Williams. Chisora stopped Sam Sexton in the final round of their 6-round non-title bout in York Hall back in June of 2008. And now they'd be rematching each other in a 12-rounder in Birmingham on September 10th, 2010, both as champions. In a back and forth nip and tuck affair that was fought at a good pace for a heavyweight bout, Chisora was proving too much for Sam Sexton as the rounds went on. He had a tired looking Sexton on shaky legs in the 9th round and pursued him with a flurry that had Sexton out on his feet, forcing the referee to wave the fight off. By way of a 9th round stoppage victory, Derek Chisora had defended his British heavyweight title, and he had won the Commonwealth heavyweight title. The British and Commonwealth heavyweight titles were unified together for the first time since Matt Skelton held the 2 belts in 2005 and gave up the British title. On July 23, 2011, Derek Chisora would be defending his British and Commonwealth titles against the heavyweight champion of England, Tyson Fury. Fury won the English title off of John McDermott on points in that controversial fight, and he defended that English title when he settled the score and stopped McDermott in a rematch. The 2011 meeting between Tyson Fury and Derek Chisora was the first British heavyweight title fight since the passing of the great Sir Henry Cooper, the most iconic holder of that British heavyweight title. Both Fury and Chisora had a record of 14-0 going into this British heavyweight title fight, so somebody's O had to go, and the bookies favoured Chisora to keep his O and his titles in this fight. The much longer Tyson Fury kept control of range in the 1st round as the pressure fighter Chisora struggled to find his way in, but Chisora would have a great deal of success in round 2, landing big shots and having Fury in trouble on more than one occasion in the round. But Fury would be right back into it, boxing Chisora around in the 3rd, and this sort of set the precedent for the rest of the fight. Fury would be in control of the action for the most part and be the more active puncher, but Chisora would have explosive moments on a very sporadic basis. Fury's punches had Chisora's mouth bloodied badly by the end of round 5, and he'd be controlling the action for the most part from then. Tyson Fury would be beaten on Derek Chisora in the 10th round as he had been for the past few rounds, but Chisora had his first big moment of the fight since round 2, when he went on a bit of a frenzy and threw a bunch of hooks that shook Fury up a bit and forced him to hold. Chisora would remain game in the championship rounds, but Tyson Fury would still dominate those last 2 rounds. The fight went the 12-round distance, and Tyson Fury ended up winning quite a wide unanimous decision on the cards. Tyson Fury had defeated Derek Chisora to become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain and the Commonwealth. Tyson Fury did not defend the British heavyweight title once. He vacated those titles in February 2012 in order to pursue world honours. When Tyson Fury vacated the titles, the British Boxing Board of Control ordered a vacant title fight between the English heavyweight champion David Price and the former Commonwealth heavyweight champ and former British heavyweight title challenger Sam Sexton. David Price had knocked out John McDermott in the first round in January to claim that vacant English title. David Price vs Sam Sexton was taking place on May 19th up in Price's hometown of Liverpool, and the vacant Commonwealth title was on the line here as well as the Lonsdale belt. David Price would drop Sam Sexton at the end of the 3rd round, and Sexton looked like a desperate man in the 4th round, as Price would rock him then drop him again not long after. After Sexton made the count again, Price would continue to pick him off with good shots for over a minute until he knocked him clean out of a right hook. David Price was the winner by a 4th round knockout, and he was the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain and the Commonwealth. David Price was the next big thing in heavyweight boxing at this point.
He worked the jab, that's the best jab I've seen since Lennox Lewis in the British ring. The patience was unbelievable. It reminded me of the night of Razor Ruddock. We've now got someone I really believe that will bring the world heavyweight title back to Great Britain.
David Price would first be defending that precious Lonsdale belt on October 13th, 2012 at the Echo Arena in Liverpool against the former Olympic gold medalist, former world title challenger and former European champion Audley Harrison. David Price blew Audley Harrison out in the very first round to successfully defend his British and Commonwealth titles. David Price was looking like a problem. 6'8", he was still undefeated and he was poleaxing everyone. On November 30th, David Price would be defending his titles in Liverpool again, against former British heavyweight champion and Lonsdale belt outright winner Matt Skelton. Skelton had become a 2-time Commonwealth heavyweight champion and a European heavyweight champion since giving up his British title in 2005. The menacing David Price kept his knockout streak up as he stopped Matt Skelton in the 2nd round to make his 2nd defence of his British and Commonwealth titles. David Price was named the 2012 ESPN Prospect of the Year, but in 2013, the heavyweight champion of Great Britain did not make a single title defence. His 2013 consisted of back-to-back stoppage losses to 41-year-old American contender Tony Thompson, and these losses to Thompson unfortunately derailed David Price's career pretty much. David Price was still the British champ after the losses to Thompson, but winning the Lonsdale belt outright was not on the agenda for David Price. He gave up the British title in December of 2013 as he still hoped to pursue world honours. The British heavyweight title was next put on the line in a rematch between former champions Tyson Fury and Derek Chisora in 2014. This was also a WBO world title eliminator, and Chisora's European heavyweight title was on the line as well as the vacant British title too. The bout was set for July 21st, but it eventually got postponed to November 29th. So well over 2.5 years after Tyson Fury gave up his British title to pursue world honours, he found himself in a world title eliminator in which the vacant British title happened to be on the line in. In their first fight in 2011, in which Fury beat Chisora for the Lonsdale belt, despite it being a very decisive Fury win, Chisora was competitive and had his moments. But in this 2014 rematch, Tyson Fury would be so dominant in each moment of each round, and Chisora began to look so hopeless in there that his trainer Don Charles would pull him out of the fight after the 10th round. Tyson Fury was the winner by stoppage, and he was the new heavyweight champion of Europe. He was mandatory for the unified heavyweight champion of the world Vladimir Klitschko's WBO title, and he became a 2-time heavyweight champion of Great Britain. Tyson Fury joined the club of Danny Williams, Joe Bugner, Jack Bodell, Sir Henry Cooper, Jack Petersen, Frank Goddard and Joe Beckett as a 2-time heavyweight champion of Great Britain. And spoiler alert, Tyson Fury is the last fighter to date, as of producing this video in the first half of 2026, to have become a 2-time British heavyweight champ. Much like in his first reign as British heavyweight champion, Tyson Fury did not make a defence of the Lonsdale belt. He beat Christian Hammer in February 2015 to get ready for Vladimir Klitschko. Then on November 28, 2015, Tyson Fury would pull off the upset and outbox and nullify Vladimir Klitschko over the 12 rounds to become the unified WBA, WBO and IBF heavyweight champion of the world and essentially end the Klitschko reign of terror. Tyson Fury became the first British heavyweight champion who went on to become heavyweight champion of the world since Lennox Lewis in 1992. So there had only been 2 British heavyweight champs who went on to be world heavyweight champs at that point, unless you count the WBO world title before its universal recognition. That would add Herbie Hyde into the mix. Yes, Frank Bruno and David Hay were both Brits who became heavyweight champion of the world between when Lennox Lewis and Tyson Fury did, but neither Bruno nor Hay ever won the British title. Tyson Fury fighting for the world titles left the British title vacant, and just 2 weeks after Fury beat Klitschko for the world titles, the two undefeated former amateur opponents Anthony Joshua and Dillian Whyte would duke it out for the vacant British heavyweight title. Dillian Whyte beat Anthony Joshua in the amateurs, just to note, dropping him in the process. Going into their fight in the pros, Anthony Joshua had just won the vacant Commonwealth heavyweight title with a win over Gary Cornish, and Joshua also held wins over former British heavyweight champions Matt Skelton and Michael Sprott. He dispatched both of them very efficiently, and Dillian Whyte held a win over former British heavyweight champion Mike Holden. The tension was brewing between Dillian Whyte and Anthony Joshua in the build-up to this vacant British heavyweight title fight, and British heavyweight boxing was kind of peaking at this point. AJ did just look the sharper and much crisper of the two in round 1, and Dillian Whyte famously crashed out as a result of a punch landed by AJ just after the bell after that first round. But then in round 2, Whyte would actually rock AJ badly with a left hook. AJ was ostensibly hurt here, he was really shaken. Beauty of heavyweight boxing, that. As I said, AJ was just looking the way sharper and crisper of the two here, but Whyte would just swing for the fences to try and intercept while AJ threw shots at him and actually caught him with a good one. AJ made it out of the round, but then Whyte had a pretty decent third round and all, which looked to have him 2-1 up after 3. But AJ did come back into it more in the 4th and won each round from then until the 7th, when he started to break Whyte down, and then he stopped him with a big right uppercut. Anthony Joshua had just destroyed Dillian Whyte to become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain and to defend his Commonwealth heavyweight title. That fight definitely lived up to the hype, and the Olympic gold medalist Anthony Joshua certainly delivered in there. Much like the last British heavyweight champion before him, Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua did not make a single defence of his British title as he went on to fight for a world title. In AJ's case, in his very next fight after winning the British title, but it wasn't quite against the level of competition that Fury had his first world title shot against. Anthony Joshua challenged Charles Martin for his IBF heavyweight title in April of 2016. AJ knocked Martin out in the second round to become heavyweight champion of the world, joining the club of Lennox Lewis and Tyson Fury as British heavyweight champs who went on to become world heavyweight champ. That's 2 British heavyweight champs in a row who became world heavyweight champion. British heavyweight boxing had come a long way. By the way, Anthony Joshua went on to win a total of 9 world heavyweight title fights in his career, becoming a 2-time unified champion in the process. Dillian Whyte was in line to fight for the British heavyweight title left vacant by his former foe and now IBF world heavyweight champion Anthony Joshua. Unfortunately, Dillian Whyte's fight with the undefeated Dave Allen in July of 2016 was not for the vacant British heavyweight title. The British Boxing Board of Control would not put the Lonsdale belt on the line here, as Dave Allen did not qualify as a legit challenger for the title. After a dominant 10-round decision victory over Allen, Dillian Whyte would be fighting an opponent who the British Boxing Board of Control did deem fit to challenge for the vacant British heavyweight title on October 7, 2016, as Whyte took on former Southern Area heavyweight champion Ian Lewison for the vacant British title in an all-Brixton affair. There was a lot of static in the build-up to this British heavyweight title fight and all, and the former challenger Dillian Whyte was much expected to get the win here. Ian Lewison did look dangerous early in the fight. Big 20-stone guy bombing forward, and he is quite athletic for his size. But Whyte was just sort of rope-a-dope and was in control by the end of the second round. Whyte would continue to outbox Lewison throughout the rounds. It was somewhat competitive, but Whyte was vastly outthrowing and outlanding Lewison, boxing Lewison around and getting stuck in to throw combos that were discouraging Lewison. There were definitely body shots in there that Lewison didn't like. And in round 10, the damage finally started to show as Dillian Whyte bloodied Lewison's nose. Looked like he broke his nose actually, and he began to make easy work of Lewison as the round went on. And when round 10 finished, Lewison's corner pulled him out of the fight. So Dillian Whyte was the winner by stoppage, and he was the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. He had won that precious Lonsdale belt on his second attempt. Now on December 10th, 2016, Dillian Whyte was set to defend the British heavyweight title against former champion Derek Chisora. And this Chisora vs Whyte fight did go ahead on December 10th as planned. But due to Derek Chisora's behaviour in the build-up to the fight, the British Boxing Board of Control would not sanction the bout as a British title fight. Derek Chisora would not become the heavyweight champion of Great Britain if he were to beat Dillian Whyte. Now, Dillian Whyte ended up winning the fight by a split decision in an all-out back-and-forth war, which probably could be called the greatest British heavyweight title fight of all time if the title was actually on the line. Dillian Whyte beat Chisora, he was still the heavyweight champion of Great Britain, but unfortunately, this win does not count as an official title defence for Dillian Whyte. And Dillian Whyte vacated his British title in January 2017, so he is not credited with having a single British title defence, despite coming out on top in an all-out war and British heavyweight boxing classic while he was British champion. Dillian Whyte vacated the British title in January 2017 because he was ordered to defend the title against former 2-time British title challenger and former Commonwealth champion Sam Sexton. but White wanted to pursue world honours and felt that a fight with Sam Sexton was a step down. The mandatory for the British heavyweight title Sam Sexton would not be in a vacant British heavyweight title fight until October 6th of 2017, and on this date he took on former Commonwealth title challenger Gary Cornish for the vacant title in Edinburgh. Gary Cornish was the first ever Scottish fighter to challenge for the British heavyweight title. The fight went the 12-round distance and Sam Sexton won by a unanimous decision, realising his dream in becoming the heavyweight champion of Great Britain on his third attempt, and Scotland was still yet to have a heavyweight champion of Great Britain after the nation's first ever challenger in the title's then 112-year history fell short. Sam Sexton would be making his first defence of his British heavyweight title against former world title challenger Hughroy on the 12th of May 2018. Hughroy is the first cousin of former two-time British heavyweight champion and former unified world heavyweight champion Tyson Fury, in case you didn't know. And Hughroy is the only ever fighter to challenge for the British heavyweight title for the first time after already having challenged for the world heavyweight title. Hughroy challenged for Joseph Parker's WBO World Heavyweight title in September 2017 and fell short in a very close and lacklustre affair when he lost a majority decision. Danny Williams, Joe Bugner and Sir Henry Cooper all challenged for and won the British heavyweight title after having challenged for the World Heavyweight title, but that wasn't their first time challenging for the British title, as they had all won the British title already before challenging for the world title as well. Derek Chisora and Matt Skelton both failed in their attempts to regain the British title as former world title challengers. In the fight between Sexton and Fury, the challenger Hughroy would dominate Sexton and stop him in the 5th round to become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. Upon winning the British heavyweight title, Hughroy and his cousin Tyson joined the club of the father and son duo Jack London and Brian London as the only two pairs of relatives to have won the British heavyweight title. Hughroy vacated his British title in March 2019, becoming the 5th British heavyweight champion in a row to not make a single defence of the title. The next British heavyweight title fight after Hughroy vs Sam Sexton, and the last British heavyweight title fight of the 2010s, was fought at the O2 Arena on July 13, 2019 between two young undefeated fighters, as former Central Area heavyweight champion Nathan Gorman and former Southern Area and English heavyweight champion Daniel Dubois battled it out for the vacant Lonsdale belt. Funnily enough, Nathan Gorman is actually referred to as Tyson Fury's cousin as well, but his relation to Tyson certainly isn't as direct as Hughie's. Daniel Dubois proved to be too much for Nathan Gorman in there, and he won by KO in the 5th round to become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. Daniel Dubois also picked up the vacant Commonwealth heavyweight title in September when he defeated Ebenezer Tete, so Dubois ended 2019 as the British and Commonwealth heavyweight champion. The first British title fight of the 2020s took place on November 28, 2020, as Daniel Dubois would be defending his British and Commonwealth titles for the first time against the undefeated former Commonwealth champion Juggernaut Joe Joyce. Joyce won that Commonwealth title in just his 4th pro fight back in 2018, and in 2019 he defended it against former world heavyweight champion Bermain Stavern. The vacant European heavyweight title was also on the line here in this fight between Daniel Dubois and Joe Joyce, because Joyce was actually the mandatory for Ajit Caballel's European title, and Caballel gave up the title instead of fighting Joyce. In this competitive and exciting battle between the two undefeated heavyweights on a collision course, the betting underdog Joe Joyce would establish an accurate jab to the face of Dubois from the opening round. But the much younger man Daniel Dubois would make connections with some explosive punches to the chin of Joyce. The challenger Joe Joyce is known to be able to take a good punch though, and he was never really hurt by Dubois, and that persistent jab from Joyce would pretty much remain the dominating factor of the fight as the rounds went on. Daniel Dubois' left eye had been swollen up badly due to the accurate jab of Joe Joyce since round 4, and by round 9, Dubois' eye was completely swelled shut. In round 10, the champion Dubois opted not to fight on with his impaired vision after he received a hard jab to that damaged eye. He took a knee and stayed down for the count. By way of a 10th round stoppage victory, Joe Joyce became the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain, the Commonwealth and Europe. This win over Daniel Dubois made Joyce a 2-time Commonwealth champ. A British title defence against Joe Joyce may have been too much of a step up for the then 23-year-old Daniel Dubois. He lost his titles and suffered a fractured eye socket in that affair. But now, 3.5 years on from this point, in June of 2024, Daniel Dubois defeated the long-time IBF #1 contender Filip Hrgović for the vacant IBF interim heavyweight title. And when undisputed heavyweight champion Alexander Usyk gave up the IBF title to go ahead with his contractually obliged rematch with Tyson Fury rather than fulfill his IBF mandatory obligations, Daniel Dubois was upgraded to the full IBF heavyweight champion of the world. So he joined the club of Lennox Lewis, Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua in the club of British heavyweight champions who went on to win a world heavyweight title. Daniel Dubois successfully defended his world title against 2-time unified heavyweight champion of the world Anthony Joshua before losing the title to its original owner Alexander under Usyk. Back to the British heavyweight title timeline, the juggernaut Joe Joyce would not make a single defence of the title before vacating it, and the next British heavyweight title fight took place between the undefeated heavyweight champion of England Fabio Wardley and the former British heavyweight title challenger Nathan Gorman at the Wembley Arena on November 26, 2022. So the title had been dormant for a couple days shy of 2 years since that Joyce Dubois fight. In an affair that was competitive and exciting while it lasted, the much more explosive and dynamic Fabio Wardley managed to drop the much more experienced and refined boxer Nathan Gorman twice in the second round. Wardley dropped Gorman again in the third, and then he poured on an onslaught that forced Gorman's corner to throw the towel in. Fabio Wardley was the winner by stoppage and had become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain in this vacant title fight. After a non-title fight victory in April of 2023, Wardley would be making his first British title defence against David Adeleye on the inaugural Riyadh season card, headlined by Tyson Fury vs Francis Ngannou on October 28, 2023 in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. There was quite a bit of needle in the build-up to this fight, and it was also the first ever British title fight to not take place on British soil. The British Boxing Board of Control are the commission for boxing events in Saudi Arabia, and the British Boxing Board of Control are of course the ones who sanction the British title. Oh, and the vacant Commonwealth title was on the line in this bout too. This was a very tense battle between these two explosive undefeated heavyweights, and early in the 6th round of the fight, Adeleye leaped in with a hard left hook on Wardley. He then caught Wardley with another hard one as the two men were tied up. Adeleye was given a word by the referee for his use of the forearm, but Adelaye's punches in the clinch clearly bothered Wardley and caught him off guard. Wardley did not seem noticeably hurt as the action resumed however, and he actually started to look the stronger fighter as the round went on, as the damage was wearing on Adelaye's face. The referee would have to break a lot of clinches in the 7th round, but in the last minute of the round, Wardley got his receipt when the ref let the fighters work it out, and Wardley whacked Adeleye with a nasty right hook then left hook on the break that dropped the challenger hard. Adeleye managed to make the count, but he was clearly hurt, and Wardley pursued him with an explosive onslaught to gain the TKO victory. A satisfying victory here for Fabio Wardley to retain his British heavyweight title and pick up that vacant Commonwealth title. Wardley would be making his second British title defence against the undefeated Olympic bronze medalist Fraser Clarke at the O2 Arena on March 31st, 2024, which was Easter Sunday. Fabio Wardley was in there against a more refined boxer yet again, and Clarke would prove to be the better boxer from early, establishing a solid jab that caused a bad cut on Wardley's nose bridge in just the 2nd round. And Clarke was also catching Wardley with some decent power shots, but it was Wardley's explosivity and unorthodoxy that made this a competitive fight. And at the end of the 5th round, the brawler Wardley caught Fraser Clarke off guard with a frenzied attack and managed to score a knockdown. In the 7th round, Fraser Clarke was deducted a point for low blows, so Wardley gained 2 point advantages, from the knockdown he scored and from the point deducted from Clarke. The two men continued to engage in a competitive battle throughout the second half of the fight. Clarke was doing the nicer boxing and connecting with a lot of good right hands, but Wardley, whose nose bridge was bleeding profusely, was all heart and would have some success with his explosive attacks. Both men were left exhausted at the end of this 12-round war and British heavyweight title classic. Wardley's face looked unrecognisable and the challenger Clarke flopped down in exhaustion after the final bell. Clarke did look to have gotten the better of the boxing contest all round, but the knockdown and the point deduction in Wardley's favour looked like they could have tightened things up on the cards. Here is what the official cards read.
Judge Michael Alexander sees the contest 114 to 113 Wardley. Judge Howard Foster sees it 115 to 112 Clarke. And finally, Judge Mark Bates sees it 113 to 113. This bout has been ruled a draw.
Fabio Wardley retained his British and Commonwealth heavyweight titles by way of a draw. The British heavyweight title had existed for over 118 years at this point, and this was the first ever draw in a British heavyweight title fight. The draw warranted an immediate rematch between Wardley and Clarke, and the rematch would take place on October 12, 2024 on the undercard of Artur Beterbiev vs Dimitri Bivol in Riyadh. So this was the second ever British heavyweight title fight not on British shores. Now, there would be no 12-round battle in this rematch, as Wardley caught Clarke cold in the first round, wobbling him with a right hand and following up with a relentless onslaught that had Clarke weary. This onslaught ended with a pair of overhand rights that put Clarke down. Clarke looked completely out of his senses here, so the referee waved off the fight. By way of a first round stoppage victory, Fabio Wardley had successfully defended his British heavyweight title for the 3rd time. This was Wardley's last British heavyweight title defence, as he went on to vacate the title in March of 2025. So Fabio Wardley won the British title and subsequently made 3 successful title defences. However, one of those title defences were a draw, meaning he had only actually won a total of 3 British title fights. Wardley therefore did not win the Lonsdale belt outright. Fabio Wardley vacated the British title to go and pursue world honours. And fast forward to October of 2025, Wardley challenged for Joseph Parker's WBO interim heavyweight title, and in an absolute war, Fabio Wardley, who was down on the scorecards at the time, pulled off the upset and stopped Parker in the 11th round to win that interim title. The full WBO World Heavyweight Champion at the time was the undisputed heavyweight champion Alexander Usyk, and Usyk opted to give up his WBO title rather than fulfill his mandatory obligation, so Fabio Wardley was upgraded to the full WBO heavyweight champion of the world. The former white-collar boxer with no amateur experience, who conceded such an experience advantage to all of his opponents in the pros, made it all the way to the point of becoming a world heavyweight champion. And he is the 5th ever heavyweight champion of Great Britain, who went on to win a world heavyweight title, joining the club with Lennox Lewis, Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua and Daniel Dubois. Back to the British title, former British heavyweight title challenger David Adelaide, who bounced back from the British title fight loss against Wardley with an impressive first round knockout victory over the undefeated Solomon Dacres to become the new heavyweight champion of England, would be fighting for the British title left vacant by Wardley on April 5th, 2025 in Manchester. Adelaide would be taking on Jamie TKV in this vacant British title fight, and Adelaide was a big betting favourite over TKV. TKV had a record of 8-1 going into this fight, and he doesn't exactly look the part by the modern standard. There was a good bit of needle in the build up to this fight as well, given that it was a David Adelaide fight.
You're a bad bitch, bro, that's what you are. You're a bad bitch. You're a bad bitch, bro.
Now in the fight, the underdog TKV would take control of the action with his jab from early. This wasn't the cleanest fight. The referee had to break a lot of clinches, and just to note, TKV would hit Adelaide with a hard right hand on the break of a clinch in round 2. Jamie TKV would continue to just outpoint Adelaide and nullify his explosive offense for the most part in this fairly lackluster and messy affair, and in round 5, it might be worth noting that TKV landed another right hand on the break of a clinch after the ref called break, and the ref had a little word with both men after this. Going into round 6, TKV did look to be ahead in the fight, but at the start of the 6th round, the two men were in the clinch and the ref called break. But TKV had his right hand low, just like his stablemate Fabio Wardley did when Adelaide caught him with a left hook in the clinch early in the 6th round of that British heavyweight title fight, and Adelaide capitalised and landed a really crisp short left hook that dropped Jamie TKV. TKV made the count, but he looked dazed, so Adelaide pursued him with an explosive combo to drop him again. TKV got up again, but he did not have the wherewithal to respond to the referee properly, so the fight was stopped. By way of a 6th round stoppage victory, David Adelaide had become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain on his 2nd attempt at the title. Now this result did spark a great deal of controversy. TKV's team were infuriated. From Adelaide's side of things, he had been hit by TKV on the break twice before in the fight, and this was just his receipt, but his shot in the clinch just happened to actually drop TKV and lead to the end of the fight. But from TKV's perspective, the injustice lied in the fact that the referee was pulling his left arm as an attempt to physically enforce the breaking of the clinch, so as far as TKV is concerned, the referee is actually getting in between him and his opponent as opposed to just shouting break. But Adelaide snuck in a hard punch on the other side, and the ref counted this as a fair knockdown despite the punch being landed as he was attempting to enforce a break. Jamie TKV's promotional team lodged a protest of this result to the British Boxing Board of Control, and within a few days of that controversial British heavyweight title fight, a rematch for the title was ordered. Now in June, David Adelaide gave up his British heavyweight title and went on to take a fight with Filip Hrgovic rather than rematch Jamie TKV for the British title. So Jamie TKV was owed another shot at the title, and the British Boxing Board of Control ordered a vacant British heavyweight title fight between Jamie TKV and Fraser Clarke. This fight would take place at the Vadent Live Arena in Derby and was originally scheduled for October 25th, 2025, but got postponed to November 29th. This fight was the first British heavyweight title fight on the BBC since their brief return to boxing over 20 years before this point, and the Olympic medalist Fraser Clarke came into his 3rd shot at the British heavyweight title here as a big betting favourite. Clarke had bounced back from his loss in the rematch to Wardley with a first round knockout victory over former Commonwealth title challenger Ebenezer Tete, and there was a very good case for Fraser Clarke actually winning that first fight against Wardley, but TKV had just suffered his 2nd stoppage loss in his 10th pro fight and was only really here because he lost that last British title fight in controversial fashion. This fight was taking place on Clarke's home turf, and the writing seemed to be on the wall for the media friendly heavyweight to pick up the British heavyweight title on boxing's return to the BBC. The favourite Fraser Clark started very fast in this fight and would land some good power shots to establish an early lead, and TKV was deducted a point at the end of the third round for low blows, which would have widened Clark's early lead. However, from the fourth round on, Jamie TKV managed to get the better of things on the inside. Fraser Clark was tiring as the action went on and seemed to have gassed out a bit due to his fast start. The underdog Jamie TKV was outdogging Clark and landing a lot of good power punches and looked to have turned things around and established a lead in the fight himself. And in the 11th round, TKV buzzed Fraser Clark and was punching a knackered looking Clark around the ring, but Clark did manage to make it out of the round on his feet. And in the 12th round, the two men scrapped it out and looked exhausted by the end of it. Jamie TKV looked the clear winner of this 12-round British heavyweight title battle, and he would get the nod in the end, but by a split decision. Jamie TKV pulled off the upset and won the British heavyweight title in his second attempt at the title, coming out on top in a grueling scrap. The man who won the British heavyweight title in the main event of the first boxing card on the BBC in over 2 decades would be making his first defence of the British heavyweight title on Netflix, as he would be taking on former cruiserweight champion of Great Britain and former cruiserweight world title challenger Richard Riakporhe on the undercard of Tyson Fury vs Arslanbek Makhmudov at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. The champion Jamie TKV was the betting underdog yet again here, so he came in as the underdog in all 3 of his British heavyweight title fights. Richard Riakporhe is a former world-level cruiserweight who looked to have filled into the heavyweight division pretty well. He was coming off of a second-round stoppage victory over the undefeated Tommy Welch, who is the son of former British heavyweight champion Scott Welch. The challenger Richard Riakporhe would prove to be too much for Jamie TKV in this stadium fight for the British heavyweight title. Riakporhe dropped TKV with an overhand right in the 5th round. TKV made the count, but Riakporhe would hurt him again not too long after and had him in trouble. He went for the finish and the referee waved off the fight. The ref was a bit eager to stop it there, but Riakporhe was getting the better of the action and did have TKV hurt. And by way of a 5th round stoppage victory, he had become the new heavyweight champion of Great Britain. Riakporhe had also become a 2-weight British champion with this victory. In the 40-year history of the British cruiserweight title, Richard Riakporhe is the first ever cruiserweight champion of Great Britain to move up and become the heavyweight champion of Great Britain. As of this recording, Richard Riakporhe is the current heavyweight champion of Great Britain, and he has yet to make a title defence. So Richard Riakporhe's victory over Jamie TKV takes us to the end of the British heavyweight title timeline. So let's quickly go through every single British heavyweight champion since the start of the title's existence in 1905 up until this day in 2026. So we've got Jack Palmer, Gunnar Moir, Iron Hague, Bombardier Billy Wells, Joe Beckett, Frank Goddard, Joe Beckett, Frank Goddard, Phil Scott, Reggie Meen, Jack Petersen, Len Harvey, Jack Petersen, Ben Foord, Tommy Farr, Len Harvey, Jack London, Bruce Woodcock, Jack Gardner, Johnny Williams, Don Cockell, Joe Erskine, Brian London, Henry Cooper, Jack Bodell, Henry Cooper, Joe Bugner, Jack Bodell, Danny McAlinden, Bunny Johnson, Richard Dunn, Joe Bugner, John L. Gardner, Gordon Ferris, Neville Meade, David Pearce, Hughroy Currie, Horace Notice, Gary Mason, Lennox Lewis, Herbie Hyde, James Oyebola, Scott Welch, Julius Francis, Mike Holden, Danny Williams, Michael Sprott, Matt Skelton, Scott Gamma, Danny Williams, Derek Chisora, Tyson Fury, David Price, Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, Dillian White, Sam Sexton, Hughie Fury, Daniel Dubois, Joe Joyce, Fabio Wardley, David Adelaide, Jamie TKV, and last but not least, Richard Riakporhe. And as for the heavyweights who won the Lonsdale belt outright, that list is made up of Bombardier Billy Wells, Henry Cooper, Horace Notice, Lennox Lewis, Julius Francis, Danny Williams, and Matt Skelton. So that was some journey, going through every single holder of a title that has existed for over 120 years. We got a lot of really interesting stories about some of the champions there, and we also got to see how the level that British heavyweight boxing was at changed throughout the years. The Henry Cooper era sparked up a level of British relevancy on the world heavyweight title scene, with Brian London, Joe Bugner and Richard Dunn following in Cooper's footsteps in challenging for Muhammad Ali's world heavyweight title, and Henry Cooper and Joe Bugner's success at European level improved Britain's total record in British versus non-British European heavyweight title fights to that of a winning record. Henry Cooper and Brian London challenged for Ali's world heavyweight title in the 60s, and Richard Dunn and Joe Bugner both challenged for Ali's world titles in the 70s. But the 1980s was a bit of a dark age in terms of the British heavyweight title, as no British heavyweight champion would challenge for a world heavyweight title in that decade. In the early 90s, Lennox Lewis changed everything in becoming the first British heavyweight champion who went on to become a world heavyweight champion, and he would remain to be a very successful world level heavyweight for the next decade plus. And the next British heavyweight champion after Lennox Lewis, Herbie Hyde, did have some world level success as he won the WBO title. But when Lennox Lewis was a reigning world heavyweight champion, the majority of his fights were in America because that's where the rest of the big dogs were at. And the British heavyweight champions in the 90s that came after Lennox Lewis and Herbie Hyde didn't have any world level success. So Lennox Lewis's world level success didn't exactly revolutionise British heavyweight boxing in and of itself. In the 2000s, British heavyweight champions Danny Williams and Matt Skelton challenged for a world heavyweight title and both fell short. And it was in the 2010s when things really changed, when two British heavyweight champions in a row, Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua, both went on to become world heavyweight champions. And as of this upload, the very next upcoming world heavyweight title fight is being fought between two former British heavyweight champions in Fabio Wardley and Daniel Dubois. This is the fourth ever world heavyweight title fight between two former British heavyweight champions. The other three were Tyson Fury vs Dillian Whyte, Tyson Fury vs Derek Chisora III, and Daniel Dubois vs Anthony Joshua. And nowadays it's a lot more common than in decades gone by for a British heavyweight champion to be one of the best heavyweights in the world while being British champion. As for who the greatest British heavyweight champion of all time is, I don't think many people will contest that in terms of their actual reign as British heavyweight champion, Sir Henry Cooper is the greatest British heavyweight champion of all time, and the greatest ever fighter to hold the British heavyweight title is Lennox Lewis. You guys make sure to leave your thoughts and opinions about the history of the British heavyweight title in the comments section down below. Thank you for making it all the way to this point in the video, and you have been listening to OME Boxing.